Hello, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, September 11th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 706 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll be joined by international human rights lawyer Craig Mokhiber to talk about the latest developments and why he thinks there is a way for the UN to step in, despite the American veto in the Security Council, and force Israel to halt the genocide. And as the UK's Labour government intensifies its crackdown on opposition to Israel's genocide, some are placing renewed hope in Jeremy Corbyn, who is launching a new left-wing party. But as Asa will discuss, there are worrying indications that Corbyn and his team have learned none of the lessons from the Israel lobby's bogus anti-Semitism campaign that destroyed Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. Later on in the program, Jon will bring us up to date on resistance operations from Gaza and the West Bank, as well as Yemeni drone and missile support operations. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. Israel has killed at least 500 Palestinians and injured nearly 2,300 between September 3rd and September 10th, according to official records from the Ministry of Health in Gaza. On Wednesday, September 10th, at least 72 Palestinians were killed since dawn, including 53 in Gaza City alone. Israel has put the entirety of Gaza City under a forced displacement order as it bombs high-rise apartment and office towers, homes, and shelters, vaporizing dozens of buildings, one city block after another, with no end in sight. Our contributor, Assam Annabi, the spokesperson for the Gaza municipality, posted this photo of one of the leaflets the Israelis dropped over Gaza City on September 8th. He writes that, quote, "As the sun rises, Israel drops leaflets on us, demanding that we leave Gaza City. I contemplate the leaflet and its poor language. I contemplate the details of the faces of my fellow workers and engineers, still preparing their equipment to begin work. I go out to the gate of the heavy machinery garage and contemplate the heavy footsteps of the people and their emaciated bodies. I return to my office, burdened with sadness and grief for Gaza, its people, and myself. I sit on a chair worn by war, dust, and worries, browsing the news and photos of my beloved, thousands of miles away. All that comes to my mind is that death is very close, closer than ever, and God is the source of help." Since Friday, September 5th, at least 7 high-rise towers have been obliterated by constant Israeli airstrikes. The Mushtaha Tower was destroyed on September 5th. Journalist Wissam Shabat filmed this clip, showing the moment Israeli warplanes targeted the high-rise. The Al-Susi high-rise residential building was struck on September 6th. Instagram user Yazan Racha filmed this clip. On September 7th, the Al Roya commercial building was destroyed. Journalist Ahmed Ibrahim captured the explosion on camera. The 12-floor building housed the headquarters of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, along with media offices, medical clinics, sports facilities, and other civilian offices and companies. PCHR said that their office on the top floor had been bombarded and extensively damaged since the start of the ongoing genocide. It was also raided by the Israeli army and used as a military base during its previous operations in Gaza City, rendering their offices inoperable. Their two other offices in Khan Yunis and Jabalia were completely destroyed last year, the group added. The Israeli army hit As-Salam Tower at night on September 8th. Journalist 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 shot this video of the moment the building exploded. Mahmoud Bassal, the spokesperson for Gaza's civil defense, stated on September 8th that the 5 buildings that had been destroyed until that point contained more than 200 apartments, with at least 20 people per unit, leaving more than 4,100 residents homeless in one night. Surrounding the towers, he says, were more than 350 tents, each sheltering families of around 10 people, which were also destroyed, displacing another 3,500. In total, more than 550 families, some 7,600 people, have been stripped of shelter and basic necessities, forced into tragic and unbearable conditions. We continue to call on the world, he says, to take action to protect innocent people here in Gaza before it is too late. More massive apartment blocks were destroyed on September 9th, and on September 10th, Israel hit the Taiba Towers in western Gaza City. Instagram user Mohammed Hamouda filmed this clip. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated that the airstrike killed approximately 15 displaced Palestinians who had sought safety in and around the building. Civil defense worker Mohamed Komsan described the overwhelming terror of displaced families as Israel's wanton destruction of Gaza City has escalated.
One of these towers, as you can see.
Hello everyone. Today in Gaza we're facing all kinds of forced displacement, not just a house or two. The occupation bombs massive residential towers that once sheltered hundreds of families. In seconds, their dreams and memories are gone. And when a tower collapses, one big question remains. Where are all these families supposed to go? Where is there any safe place left? Every day the space around us gets smaller. The occupation advances, pushing us tighter between the sea, the tanks and the rubble. Displacement isn't just losing walls of your home. It's a deep psychological wound. Constant fear and anxiety, a scene of loss, and sometimes even feel like a stranger among your own people. This is our reality today, a reality where people are stripped of the simplest right, the right to have a place to sleep.
Mohammed Komsan of the Civil Defense in Gaza. The strike on the Al Roya commercial building on September 7th happened just days after the United States officially sanctioned the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, along with Al-Haq and Al-Mizan, the leading human rights organizations working on international criminal accountability for perpetrators of atrocity crimes in Palestine. In a joint statement on September 5th, the human rights groups said that, quote, threatened by the impact and role of our advocacy, legal research, and documentation in exposing Israel's ongoing international crimes, the United States has resorted to punishing individuals and organizations seeking to uphold the legal system upon which the international community was founded. The implications go beyond Palestine. By protecting Israel from accountability, they are dismantling the international legal order and undermining the possibility of justice for victims of grave crimes anywhere. Israel also targeted a facility for people with disabilities in central Gaza City on September 7th. Journalist 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 captured the strike. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 also documented Israel's attack on the Thawba Mosque that same day in the Al-Daraj neighborhood. He says that right after the attack on the mosque, the area was targeted a second time while he was filming. Quote, just now the place was bombed again, a totally random bombing, he says. A man on the street tells 𝐓𝐡𝐞 that the Israeli army called people and said they will strike again, and told them to evacuate this area as they are about to bomb it.
الآن قيام جيش الاحتلال باستهداف مسجد التوبة في حي الدرج. هذا هو مشهد الدمار الذي حدث في المنطقة. الآن تم استهداف المكان مرة أخرى ونحن في المنطقة متواجدون. الآن تم استهداف المكان مرة أخرى. ايش اللي صار؟
رنوا عليه قالوا له بدنا نخبط، في ناس رجعت تاني في الشارع قالوا يدخلوا من بيني معانا، ازعجوا عليهم يقولوا لهم يطلعوا بدنا نخبط.
That was from journalist Ahmed 𝐓𝐡𝐞 on September 7th. Palestinians in Gaza City say they are not leaving their city on Israel's orders. Journalist Nahed Hajjaj captured this clip of a man standing on a pile of rubble on September 10th, saying, quote, the army is striking high-rise buildings to force people to go south. I'm not leaving. If Netanyahu destroys everything, I'm not leaving. I will clean this up and live here once again. I'm not leaving. Even if I have to die here, I am not leaving.
الجيش قاعد بيضرب ابراج عشان يخلي الناس تروح على الجنوب.
مش طالع. لو بده يقدم مش طالع نتنياهو. مش طالع. لا بضفه وقعد ثاني. مش طالع.
لا بدكش تروح على الجنوب رغم التهديدات.
معناش يطلع. ما له دعوه فيا. مش طالع. والله لو بموت فيها ما انا طالع.
Palestinians led a demonstration in Gaza City against Israel's genocidal displacement orders. Dr. Munir al-Bursh, the Director General of the Ministry of Health in Gaza, posted this photo of himself at the protest on Wednesday. He stated, quote, in a historic scene, community leaders, families, healthcare teams, and all the people of Gaza gathered in one of the largest demonstrations, carrying Palestinian flags and symbolic shrouds to declare a unified stance. Displacement from Gaza only towards the sky. Gaza tells the world, we will not leave except as martyrs. Here we were born, and here we remain. Meanwhile, a BBC investigation found that U.S. mercenary forces working security at the joint American-Israeli private Gaza Humanitarian Foundation killing sites masquerading as aid distribution points include members of a motorcycle gang with an extremist right-wing white Christian nationalist ideology. At least 10 members of the Infidels Motorcycle Club, who are working in Gaza for 𝐓𝐿 Solutions, a private contractor providing security at the GHF sites, have been identified by the British broadcaster, which revealed that 7 members of the gang are in senior security positions in Gaza. Quote, Infidels MC was set up by U.S. military veterans of the Iraq War in 2006, and members see themselves as modern crusaders, using the Crusader cross as their symbol, a reference to the medieval Christians who fought Muslims for control of Jerusalem, the BBC says. The gang is currently hosting anti-Muslim hate speech on its Facebook page, and has previously held a pig roast in defiance of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The gang's leader, Johnny Taz Mulford, is a former sergeant in the U.S. Army who was punished for conspiracy to commit bribery, theft, and making false statements to military authorities. He is now the country team leader running 𝐓𝐿 Solutions contract in Gaza. 𝐓𝐿 Solutions is paying each contractor nearly $1,000 per day, including expenses, rising to about $1,600 per day for team leaders at GHF's so-called safe distribution sites, documents seen by the BBC show. Meanwhile, Israeli forces have killed nearly 2,500 Palestinians and injured more than 17,000 at so-called aid sites since the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began its operations in late May, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. Children and adults alike are continuing to die of starvation across Gaza. The health ministry said that 5 deaths from starvation were reported between Tuesday and Wednesday, including a child, bringing the total recorded number of deaths from malnutrition to 404, including 141 children. The mother of 18-month-old Ali Abdul Nasser Abu Adra, who is hospitalized with extreme malnutrition at Nasser Medical Complex, says that her baby's weight has dropped to just 3 kilograms. He should weigh at least 10, and he is suffering from chronic diarrhea and dehydration. Journalist Mohammed Ashraf Salama captured this clip of the mother and her baby Ali earlier this week. She says that her son is so fragile that medical staff haven't been able to insert an intravenous cannula into his body for the past 10 days, and that he is in desperate need of treatments that are not available due to Israel's ongoing blockade. She adds that a referral for medical evacuation was issued 9 months ago and was renewed last month, but the World Health Organization has not contacted her yet, nor have they provided her with any assistance. Malnourished patients at Nasser Medical Complex are dying, she warns. Quote, there is no treatment and no nutrition. Israel is continuing to attack and bomb medical facilities in Gaza. On September 7th, Israeli quadcopter drones attacked the Association for Women and Child Protection, a maternity care facility, killing a child and a pregnant woman seeking services and injuring several Palestinians. A man was also killed. His own child found him in pieces. The man, identified as Ahmed Ashur al-Ghul, was a staff member at the facility. He had asked his young son, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, to fetch his phone charger from his office nearby. As the boy walked back with the charger in hand, the Israeli drone bombed the entrance to the clinic, with 𝐓𝐡𝐞 finding his father's body and head torn to pieces in front of him, according to al-Ghul's cousin, the novelist and activist Yusri al-Ghul. Journalist Mahmoud Abu Salama reported from the scene following the drone strike. Along with showing several people killed and wounded, his camera captures 𝐓𝐡𝐞 staring at his father's body. Abu Salama says that another Israeli airstrike has just happened near the hospital. Quote, here is a violent Israeli airstrike targeting this place. A number of martyrs, as you can see. This is the scene, he says.
استهداف الآن بجوار مستشفى الوفا عدد من الشهداء والمصابين كما تشاهدون في هذه الغارة الإسرائيلية هنا في هذا المكان. هذه غارة أخرى أيضا بجوار المستشفى كما تشاهدون طائرة لاستهداف بجوار مستشفى الوفا. هنا غارة إسرائيلية عنيفة استهدفت هذا المكان عددا من الشهداء كما تشاهدون. هذا هو المشهد لمنتظري الشهداء. هذا هو المشهد.
Turning quickly to the occupied West Bank, Israeli settlers stormed Masafar Yatta near Al-Khalil on September 5th, stabbing and assaulting the villagers of Khalat al-Daba. Sahat news agency reported that at least 13 Palestinians were wounded, including a 3-month-old baby, 2 elders, and women and children. On September 10th, armed settlers attacked the homes and properties of Palestinians south of Al-Khalil, according to Wafa news agency. A local resident said that settlers used tractors and drones to terrorize people and their livestock in the area. He added that settlers have been playing loud music at night in an attempt to instill fear among the local children. Israeli soldiers have been raiding towns and villages northwest of Jerusalem for days, following a suspected resistance operation by Palestinians earlier this week at the Ramot Junction in occupied East Jerusalem, which killed 6 people and wounded 12. Local sources told Wafa news agency on Wednesday that Israeli forces stormed the town of Biddu amidst confrontations and fired live ammunition, tear gas, and sound bombs at Palestinians. They raided and searched several homes. The sources added that Israel launched a large-scale raid on homes in the towns of Qatna and Al-Qubayba, assaulting people, ransacking and searching their contents, and turning a home into a military barracks. They detained and interrogated citizens on the spot. Al Jazeera reported on September 9th that during the intensified raids, Israeli forces destroyed 3 other homes of Palestinian resistance operatives and a detainee accused of an earlier attack as punishment. Soldiers encircled the house of detainee Thabit Masalma, accused of having carried out a shooting in December in the town of Beit Awa, southwest of Hebron, before blowing up the property with explosives. The raid sparked clashes with locals, during which Israeli soldiers fired live ammunition, wounding 2 people. Masalma is accused of taking part in an attack that killed an Israeli settler and wounded 3 people. The demolition left the detainee's wife, parents, and 3 children homeless. In the town of Aqaba, north of Tubas, Israeli forces also demolished the homes of 2 prominent local leaders of the Qassam Brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, who had been killed in Israeli operations, Al Jazeera reported. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight There Is Nowhere Left to Go, We Are Trapped, by Malak Hijazi, writing from Gaza City. Malak writes, quote, "Before the announcement of a ceasefire in January 2025, I was among the 400,000 people who stayed in northern Gaza. The experience was overwhelming and unbearably hard. Israel did everything possible to force us southward. We endured severe bombardment, chessboard-like displacement, and famine for more than a year. But my family and I refused to leave. We knew the occupation could not force us to abandon the places where we were born, raised, and lived most of our lives. And we knew that if we left northern Gaza, the occupation would take over our land. The morning of September 9th, after a night of relentless shelling that shook both the walls and our nerves, I woke to the news that the Israeli army had ordered 900,000 people in Gaza City to move southward to what they call a humanitarian zone. The warning came shortly after Netanyahu declared, quote, "In the past 2 days, 50 of these towers have fallen. The Air Force brought them down. Now all of this is just an introduction, just a prelude to the main intense operation, a ground maneuver of our forces who are now organizing and gathering in Gaza City." On the maps, the entire area was marked in red, a color that now signifies danger and death. Netanyahu calls these attacks a prelude, while for us, life has been a continuous hell. The Israeli F-16s and helicopters are intensifying their bombing of the city while quadcopter drones hover above. Sometimes they drop leaflets with evacuation orders. Other times they release small bombs directly over our heads and homes. They have broadcast insults that I have personally heard, calling us cows and dogs, or shout, "Stay tuned, we will invade Gaza City soon." In recent days, Israel has destroyed several prominent buildings in Gaza, including Al-Susi and Al-Roya towers, landmarks that once anchored neighborhoods and gave the city a sense of structure, identity, and even a hint of modernity. The families who had lived in them were suddenly homeless. These buildings had also been surrounded by dozens of tents, families living in their shadow after losing their homes. When the towers fell, the rubble crushed the spaces where the tents had been, and the displaced were displaced again, their shelters rendered uninhabitable. This is not a battle. Each armored vehicle carries enough explosive to obliterate everything within 100 meters, including homes, streets, and all that lies between. The tanks roam the streets like mechanized predators, forcing entire neighborhoods to flee in panic. My family and I have searched desperately for an apartment farther south in the Strip. Khan Yunis and Rafah have already been pulverized, reduced to ruins. We cannot survive winter in a tent. We have called every number, begged friends, searched endlessly. There is nowhere left in Gaza to absorb us. Many people will not leave, not because they want to risk their lives, but because of the numb indifference that follows witnessing genocide. Death has become, for many, the easier and more affordable option. For us, there is no longer even the illusion of choice. The walls are closing in, and we ask not only where we can go, but whether there will be any place left at all. Those are excerpts from There Is Nowhere Left to Go, We Are Trapped by Malek Hijazi, a writer in Gaza, on electronicintifada.net. And now, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Gaza. Ahmed Mouin Abu Amsha, a music teacher and someone we frequently feature in this section, documented his own perilous forced displacement this past week. But in setting up his tent shelter near the beach, he found a new parachute to protect the kids from the sun, which he said he will put above the tents and the activity spaces he and his colleagues have established for music classes. He captioned this clip, quote, "We played with it under the strong wind. It was pulling us, and the children's laughter filled the air. Later, we set it up as a safe shade above the tents. Even though preparing the new space took so much time and effort, we do our best to create a place of joy and hope for the children."
Hello everyone. Today we have a parachute. I'm gonna put it above my tents and for the activity to cover the kids from the sun.
And Instagram user Mohammed Abu Kamar, who regularly posts videos singing with friends and children on the beach, sang a song for the Gaza-bound international flotilla, which is aiming to break the siege on Gaza with dozens of boats this week.
من شاطئ بحر غزة بنستنى في اسطول الحرية يا اسطول الحرية بدكم القوية بتفعل القضية غزة بنستناكم ندعي ربي معاكم يحفظكم من الأذية غزة بتستناكم
And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Always makes me feel better to see you, especially after, a week of more unbearable horror.
Yeah.
The messages that we're getting from our friends and colleagues in Gaza, as well as what they're posting on social media about the apocalyptic situation, particularly in Gaza City, are, indescribable. And it's particularly heartbreaking to get messages from friends who have endured everything that Israel has done over the last 2 years and saying, we didn't think they could make it worse, and they have. The relentless round-the-clock bombing, the massacres that you just talked about. And so they're just constantly in my thoughts, and I know in the thoughts of everyone who's watching and listening to us today. Yeah,
and all of us. I mean, just, Asim, who I quoted from early on in the newscast, his posts, his tweets, his texts have been devastating is not the right word, just almost unbearable. And to have to keep watching our friends and our colleagues and people we don't know personally, but people who are trying to survive. Day after day after day, being subjected to this torture is just, it's uncontainable rage and grief constantly.
Well, we have a lot to talk about, both in terms of the effort to stop this horrific genocide and the ways people around the world are still getting active, mobilizing, and even a bit of good news on that front. So we'll get to that later in the show. But now we're going to focus on efforts to stop this genocide in its tracks, and that's what we're going to talk about with our next guest. I'll just remind everyone that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abunimah, here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. After 22 months of unprecedented carnage, three things are clear. First, the Israeli regime will not end the genocide in Palestine of its own will. Second, the US government, Israel's principal collaborator, as well as the majority of Israelis and the regime's proxies and lobbies in the West, are fully committed to this genocide and to the destruction and erasure of every remnant of Palestine from the river to the sea. And third, other Western governments like the UK and Germany, as well as far too many complicit Arab states in the region, are fully dedicated to the cause of Israeli impunity. Those are the words of international human rights lawyer Craig Mokhiber in an article he wrote late last month for Mondowise, headlined, "How the UN Could Act Today to Stop the Genocide in Palestine." Craig Mokhiber is supporting an initiative to force Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza using the UN's Uniting for Peace mechanism. Craig and I both spoke in an online seminar about this initiative last week, chaired by Dr. Jill Stein. We were, of course, joined by many other incredible speakers, and I believe that's online if you want to watch it. Under the initiative, the UN General Assembly would act by denying Israel's credentials, calling for sanctions and a military embargo, establishing a criminal tribunal, reactivating the UN's anti-apartheid mechanisms, and mandating a UN protection force to protect civilians and facilitate aid, as well as to preserve evidence of Israeli war crimes. We're going to talk about all this and more with Craig Mokhiber, who joins us live now.
Hi, Craig.
Hi, Craig.
Hi, Nora. Hi, Ali. Nice to be with you again.
Welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream. Craig, before we get onto some of those topics, let's start with your reaction to Israel's air attack on Doha, the Qatari capital, on Tuesday. Israel said it was intended to kill the Hamas negotiating team led by senior figure Khalil al-Hayya. Hamas said that al-Hayya survived, but the attack killed 6 people, including al-Hayya's son and an aide and a Qatari citizen. Israel itself reportedly acknowledged to the US on Wednesday that the attack failed to kill Hamas's senior leaders. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, Yemen's Al Masira TV reported that Israeli strikes targeted a health facility in Sana'a and a government building in the Al Hazm district. There have also been reports in the last 24 hours of Israeli attacks on other Yemeni civilian targets, including media outlets, killing and injuring dozens of people. And of course, at the end of August, Israeli attacks on Sana'a, the Yemeni capital, killed Yemen's Prime Minister Ahmed al-Rahawi and almost a dozen other ministers and senior officials, scarcely even generating any international headlines. Israel has also reportedly been attacking boats in Tunisia that are part of the international flotilla trying to break the siege on Gaza. Craig, I know that's a lot, but I just want to get your reaction to these actions by Israel.
Well, Ali, once again, this is one of those acts that reminds us that what the Israeli regime is doing with its American partner principally is not just attacking Palestine and Palestinians. It's attacking the entire world. It's attacking the international legal framework. It's attacking the international diplomatic framework. Rule number 1 of diplomacy is you don't murder your diplomatic counterparts, right? This was a team that was in Qatar to negotiate a ceasefire. This was an attack on a residential and diplomatic quarter in Doha. And, it's so typical of Israel. This was a treacherous, a perfidious crime. This reminds us of the murder of Nasrallah in Beirut, who was there having agreed to a ceasefire when the Israelis murdered him. And then, we all remember the US-Israeli attack on Iran, where they pretended to be negotiating in order to carry out a sneak attack, just as they did in this case. And I think what it shows us is that there's nothing more threatening to the Israeli regime than negotiations and a possible ceasefire, because they see this as an inconvenient obstacle to what their plans are now, what their plans have always been, which is the total destruction of Gaza, the total destruction of Palestine, and completing its genocide there. It does not want a ceasefire. Now, as an international lawyer, I'm compelled to say this was a serious violation of international law. It was the crime of aggression under the UN Charter. It's a grave breach of international humanitarian law, gross violation of international human rights law, the crime of murder. But very much, as I'm saying, an attack on international law itself and on the idea diplomacy. So how does Israel do this? Israel does this because this is the product of decades of impunity, guaranteed by the US, guaranteed by our tax dollars. And Israel, because of that sense of impunity, it doesn't deny its crimes, it brags about them, right? It was also, I have to say, a clear case of US complicity. It's so funny to watch these corporate reporters talking to Trump and to people in the administration about, you know, what he knew and what he could have done and so on. This is all part of the greater show. This was US complicity. The US drew negotiators to Qatar with a kind of a loosely drafted non-proposal. It armed the assassins. It almost certainly greenlit their killings. And it stood down US air defenses that are based in Qatar, allowing the strikes to take place on their own allies. And why I think that's important is because it reveals, again, if they need more evidence of this, the Faustian nature of this deal that the Gulf states have entered into with the US-Israel access, where they've sacrificed their sovereignty, they've sacrificed their economies, they've sacrificed their honor. They're hosting US military bases, the biggest one of all, in Qatar, normalizing with the Israeli regime even as it perpetrates a genocide. And they're doing this with the expectation that means they'll be safe from the ravages of the US empire. Of course, it was always going to end badly for them, but I don't think any of them expected that they'd be thrown under the bus by the US so quickly, you know, standing down its military defenses in Qatar. And I think if they don't respond in a meaningful way, they're all going to need to brace themselves for this to continue as the new normal, or as Netanyahu says, the new Middle East as he sees it. Just one more thing I want to say about this is that there is a tendency in the media to talk about these things as incidents, you know, disconnected incidents. But you don't have to zoom back very far to see that what's happening here is an assault on the region and on the world. Genocide in Palestine, occupying territory in Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. The transnational terror attacks in Lebanon with booby-trapped pagers, attacks on Iran and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen. This attack on humanitarian boats in Tunisia just in the last couple of days, and its extension of its proxies in our own countries in the West to attack students and academics and human rights defenders and peace activists, even as it builds its nuclear stockpiles, as it supports with technology and weapons the most oppressive regimes all around the world, as it surveils all of us with its technology, and as it spends billions of dollars to spread its racist ideology all around the world. It is hard to understand how, you know, ordinary people are not able to see the seriousness of the threat that is facing us. This is our 1930s moment, and yet the world is sitting on its hands and not responding to this collective of horrors that is being perpetrated on it, all because of the impunity that's been afforded to the Israeli regime by the US and other Western partners now for decades. And let's hope this is some kind of a wake-up call to the countries in the Gulf and to the countries more broadly in Western Asia. We'll see.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Uniting for Peace mechanism. In your article for Mondo Weiss that we referenced earlier, you argue that the UN can bypass an inevitable US Security Council veto and actually act to materially force Israel to stop the genocide using this mechanism. Explain very simply what that is and why you think it's worth the effort to try and use it right now, especially when so many international mechanisms seem to have been completely paralyzed or have failed. You know, I mean, the so-called international rules-based order, as you said, is it's rotting. I mean, it's nothing. It's completely gone at this point.
Yeah, well, it's being pulled apart piece by piece and by design. That there's no question about it. But you know, the world as it is now, you know, the only universal intergovernmental organization is the United Nations. And the United Nations has good parts and bad parts. It has some very good parts in the heroic UNRWA colleagues, 360 of them who've been murdered by the Israelis during this current wave of genocide, many along with their families, independent human rights mechanisms that have been documenting and speaking out and doing advocacy, like Francesca Albanese, who has not only received death threats and harassment everywhere she goes, but US sanctions for doing so. There are parts of the UN that are good and that are helping to serve the cause. And I don't think we want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but as we've discussed on this show before, the political side of the House is failing miserably. And part of it is failing by design. That's the Security Council, which was created by the powerful victors of World War II to give themselves the veto to prevent anything meaningful from happening that they didn't agree with. That's the imperial piece. That's a disaster, but that's a disaster by design, right? So you have a lot of states who like to throw up their arms and say, well, we tried, but the Americans vetoed it. And what we're saying is there are things that can be done to get around that veto. And the most obvious one is this thing called the Uniting for Peace resolution. This resolution, this Cold War relic from 1950, that actually gives the General Assembly, which is the democratic body, the body where there's no veto and where every country in the world has a vote, one vote, that it actually is empowered by Uniting for Peace to act when the Security Council is blocked by a veto. And it has done so in the past. In 1956, it mandated the UN Emergency Force, which was deployed to the Sinai during the height of the Suez Crisis, against the wishes of both the French and the British, who had vetoes in the Security Council, against the wishes of the Israelis. And it actually managed to deploy a force there to help to respond to the Suez crisis. The Uniting for Peace resolution has been used several times since, including with regard to Palestine, including during the current genocide, but always just for symbolic resolutions that called for a ceasefire and humanitarian aid and all those sort of things, but without any practical measures. And what we're saying is that legally and with a precedent and with all the powers that they need, the UN General Assembly, without the fear of the US veto, could adopt a resolution under Uniting for Peace with specific actions. It could declare economic and diplomatic and political sanctions against the Israeli regime. It can't enforce them, but it can adopt them, it can monitor them, it can expand them, it can give a multilateral diplomatic cover to all countries to advance those sanctions. It could do the same with a military embargo. It could demand the withdrawal of Israel's UN General Assembly credentials, as was done with South Africa during the apartheid regime. It could establish a criminal tribunal to actually bring cases against Israeli perpetrators at all levels. Great that the ICC has made some modest movement in there. Great that the ICJ is addressing genocide. But what you need is a much more massive response to a massive set of crimes being perpetrated by Israel, not just to hold them accountable in the future, but to ratchet up the sense of deterrence against these perpetrators, and not just those who would shelter in Israel, but those who are dual nationals and who are flying back and forth, participating in the genocide, and then walking the streets of our own cities as well. And it could reactivate the UN's anti-apartheid mechanisms that were one small but important piece of the struggle against the South African regime as well. And then finally, what it could do, and it could do this, it could adopt a mandate for a multinational protection force to be deployed to Palestine with a specific mandate to protect civilians, to facilitate humanitarian aid, to preserve evidence of Israeli crimes, and to begin the process of recovery and reconstruction. There are no legal hurdles to this. It's entirely possible. There is a tradition of enough of a voting margin. We'd need 2/3 in the General Assembly. In other historic resolutions there, all of those things are possible. And we are at a historic moment here, not only because of the situation on the ground where much of the world is waking up and saying, wait a minute, this really is genocide. Wait a minute, they are starving them to death. Wait a minute, they are massacring civilians. But that there was a deadline that was set by the General Assembly a year ago that will expire on about the 18th of September, in just a matter of a few days, at which, if Israel has not complied with the findings of the International Court of Justice, it has not. If it has not complied with the demands of the UN General Assembly, it has not. The General Assembly has said it will adopt further measures. Now, the risk is those further measures will either be meaningless, like another resolution calling for a ceasefire, or some other rhetorical thing, or potentially damaging, like this idea being circulated by the French and the Saudis of a so-called stabilization force, which will do, in my view, more harm than good, or that it won't act. And in that vacuum, you'll see something emerge like the mad delusions of President Trump and his so-called great occupation of of Palestine to be one big casino in a kind of private occupation that we haven't seen since King Leopold claimed to own the Congo and used it for his own economic benefit. This is the one proposal which is not based upon a Chapter 7 mandate to be imposed against the will of the Palestinians, which is not a proxy occupation force, which is not something that comes after the genocide has been concluded, but which could be deployed now against considerable hurdles that we can talk about, but which could be deployed now to actually protect Palestinians from genocide as it is happening. And in the past, this has not happened because these kinds of conversations take place in the shadows of Turtle Bay, in the back rooms of the UN in New York City. And what we are trying to do is to drive this conversation into the light of public scrutiny, where states that rhetorically, we're not trying to convince the Americans and the Israelis or their little puppet regimes in the South Pacific or a couple of far-right regimes that might vote with them. We're trying to tell the rest of the world, you have to now tell the world under the light of day that you either say yes or you say no to a protection force that could be deployed to Palestine to save the lives of a people facing extermination. And the hope is that that will, to some degree, change the political calculus, change the incentive structure under which these delegations behave and these countries behave in multilateral fora like the UN, to get to the first step where all they have to do is to adopt this resolution. Now, this, I want to say before I shut up and listen to questions, this does not replace the long-term strategy for Palestinian liberation. This is something that is a very short-term move to get immediate protection now, and it relies upon all of us to continue the struggle for boycott and divestment and sanctions and prosecutions and education and civil disobedience and public demonstrations, and all of that has to continue as it did in the long-term struggle in South Africa. It needs to continue in the long-term struggle for the liberation of Palestine. But what do we do right now? And the answer is only resistance by the Palestinian people, steadfastness by the Palestinian public, solidarity from the rest of us and ratcheting up that solidarity in all of our actions. But what about intervention? If there's going to be an intervention, this is the one that operates with the consent of the Palestinian people, with a specific mandate that doesn't stick its nose into issues of Palestinian governance or the role of Hamas or the role of the PA. It merely says, which by the way is none of the business of the UN. That's up to the Palestinian people. It merely says, we're going to deploy this force, and in this force, you're going to have, I mean, imagine Spanish, Irish, Slovenian, South African, Namibian, Colombian, Brazilian, Indonesian, Malaysian, all of these contingents sent from countries entering by land, sea, air, under an international mandate, not as an invasion and combat force, but as an armed protection force for the Palestinian people. There's a chance, not 100%, not a panacea, but there is a chance to use a power that exists to intervene to save lives. And all we're asking, tell us one by one, 193 countries, yes or no to protecting Palestine from annihilation. And if you say no, then you have revealed yourself, not just to the world, but to your own people, and suffer the consequences then.
Thanks, Craig. That's a great explanation of what you have in mind. I was going to ask you about, you do a good job of this in your Mondoweiss article and also in the seminar that you and I were both part of the other day, in explaining why this international force is not like some of the others we've seen mandated by the UN, which are really a cover for US imperialism, or are there actually to protect Israel from its victims, as we've seen with some of the other types of UN or international forces that have been talked about. This would be something different. You can say something about that if you want to, although I feel you've addressed it to an extent. But what really I want to push you on is, how realistic is all this? You've argued already and convincingly that states do not need any further UN resolution to act to stop Israel's genocide. They have all the authorization they need, including for military action. And indeed, they have the legal obligation to act under the UN Genocide Convention, but only a few countries have done anything at all. Why would a Uniting for Peace resolution make a difference when what is clearly missing here is not legal cover, but political will? How much support are you seeing for a United for Peace resolution now when the UN General Assembly convenes later this month in New York? And also a question that I see people asking in the comments is, there's lots of people who want to lend their support to this. How can ordinary people who are watching and listening to us today, help to push this process forward? So a challenge, and also how can we do it?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Well, first, you're right that any country can legally intervene, either individually or collectively with others, to stop this genocide and these grave breaches of international humanitarian law. And as I have written, these are obligations. Those obligations already exist. They don't need anything further to do so. But we all know that in concrete terms, the only government that has done so has been the Ansar Allah government in Yemen, which has intervened as being mercilessly attacked for doing so, right? Others, I think that there is a sincere outrage at what is happening, but most states behave in very conservative ways. And the argument here is that if you provided a multinational mandate from the United Nations that provides diplomatic cover, political cover, some legal strengthening of the case, other states may be willing to step forward in a way that they're not willing to expose themselves to simply go and attack the Israeli regime unilaterally. So this provides further incentive. As I said, all of this is about changing the incentive structure, changing the political calculus to the extent that we have the power to do so, so that almost universal inaction could be turned not into universal action, but some action from some countries. And there is support. Some of the most vocal voices have been the president of Ireland. Now, the president of Ireland doesn't command Irish foreign policy in the way that presidents in other countries do, but it's not unimportant. And there's a lot of, as you know, Ali, having just returned, there was a lot of support in Ireland as well for these kinds of initiatives. But, others, such as the president of Colombia, who have not only spoken out in support of this, but have already begun action around this question, and still others who you would expect to step forward within the Hague Group, for example. All you need is one country to ask for this. But in order to push it through, you would need a group of so-called co-sponsors, so a group, ideally a cross-regional group of countries that have said the right things and begun to take action in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and so on, to shepherd it through in the General Assembly. It is entirely possible. It's only a question of political will. And of course, the elephant in the room is the United States, as always, or the elephant in the china shop is the United States, because of course it will do everything that it can, lawfully and unlawfully, to try to first prevent the adoption of the resolution, and second, to try to prevent its implementation. But the first part, the adoption of the resolution, that's entirely possible. Not easy, but that's a diplomatic challenge that I think could be overcome if, and I'll just repeat it again, if we can get the conversation into the light enough that delegations aren't hiding in the shadows and taking the easy way out, which is a rhetorical resolution that condemns Israel and calls for a ceasefire. If we can force it into the light and force them to answer this specific question of a protection force, then that helps to change that political calculus. Then you have the question of what happens once the force is trying to deploy, and that is far from guaranteed. But, a force of contingents made up of Spanish and Irish and Slovenian and South African and Namibian and Kenyan and Colombian and Brazilian and Malaysian and Indonesian contingents sailing under the UN flag it's not a slam dunk that even a ruthless regime like the Israelis, who have attacked UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, who have murdered UN staff in Gaza, it's not obvious that they would then be in a position to directly attack those forces coming with a specific mandate not to engage in battle with the Israelis, but to provide protection in Gaza, where, by the way, the International Court of Justice has affirmed Israel has no say. It has no sovereignty, it has no authority, it has no rights in Gaza or the West Bank, and it has no say in this question legally. So that changes, I think, the political calculus somewhat, and potentially, if it's accompanied by, imagine this force coming in, accompanied by massive diplomatic pressure from across regions, accompanied by international media, accompanied by global movements, shining the light on this process as well. There are no guarantees with a regime like the Israeli regime, or frankly, a regime like the Trump regime. But it does change the political calculus. And then imagine that they deploy, but they don't get in. This is also a very significant ratcheting up of the political and diplomatic pressure. It is a push for an even better alignment of states if Israel dares to obstruct or to block this action. And it's still not guaranteed, but people have talked about sending a protection force to Palestine for decades. The stars have never been aligned as they are now, both because of the situation on the ground and because of the deadline and the ratcheting up of pressure and the demands coming from the people that watch this show and the people in movements all around the world, and particularly in the West. There's never been a chance that is good as it is now, which is at best a 50% chance. And there will not be in the future a chance as good as this. And we can't leave a vacuum to be filled by the mad fantasies of Donald Trump and Kushner and Tony Blair, who they dug up in some crypt and have involved in this process of Trump's planning as well, if we have an opportunity to do this. And, you know, if we ask for it and they don't do it, it's their sin. If we don't ask for it, it's our sin, right? We can't leave any, as I've said, arrows in the quiver when we're fighting extermination. We have to use everything that we have. And here's the last thing I'll say on this. Either the UN will do this after 2 years of sitting on its hands in a live-streamed genocide, something it was established to address these kinds of atrocities and aggression and the kind of behavior that the Israeli regime is engaged with, not just in Palestine, but across Western Asia and beyond. Either they will use what they have, the powers that they have, and take the action that they're supposed to take, or it will absolutely be the beginning of the end of these institutions, whose credibility is already hanging by a thread, whose legitimacy is already hanging by a thread. You can't blame the US veto in the Security Council if you have another option and you choose not to take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the credibility of these international bodies is it's very little. Craig, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently denied visas to the leaders of the Palestinian Authority, including Mahmoud Abbas, to attend the UN General Assembly, you know, proving that no matter how much you capitulate to the enemy, you say that the security of Israel is sacred, the security cooperation of the PA is sacred, you'll still get punished by Israel and the US. And leaving aside the issue about the legitimacy of Abbas as a leader and of the PA's complicity in Israel's occupation and other crimes, what has the UN's reaction been, and what should it be to this gross interference by the host country who can and cannot attend? And then to that end, the U.S. State Department just levied sanctions against 3 major human rights organizations in Palestine that have been meticulously documenting Israel's crimes and creating, files and files and files that have been sent to the ICJ and the ICC. And then, of course, Antonio Gutteres, the UN Secretary General, is not lifting a finger to do any of the measures that the UN, as you said, was established to do in times of occupation and genocide and ruthless ethnic cleansing. How do you see these kind of three newsy items fitting together? What does this say about how much stake people should be putting in the UN at the top levels to hold anybody accountable at this point?
Well, we have to try. I mean, absolutely, we have to try, and we have to keep the pressure on. I mean, you've heard my critique of the UN Secretary General and the political leadership of the UN, over and over again. I think they were the wrong people at this moment in history, and they're going to have to live with their abdication, with their failures as well. I mean, this blocking of visas by the United States, I mean, this is an absolutely lawless government. We know that this is unlawful because, this is a breach of U.S. treaty obligations. The UN host country agreement with the United States is a treaty. It is binding law, and it is being ignored, just as the UN Convention on Privileges and Immunities is being breached by the United States in doing so. They don't care. This is an absolutely lawless government, right? And they know very well that Palestine is going to be the centerpiece of this 80th session of the UN General Assembly. That there's going to be a discussion on the two-state solution. There are going to be interventions on the genocide in Palestine. There are going to be a number of states that are announcing their recognition of Palestine. There are going to be a number of reports received on Palestine from the Secretary General and from the High Commissioner of Human Rights and from agencies and others. The very centerpiece of this session of the General Assembly is Palestine. And so, in obsequious performance of the commands of the Israeli regime, the U.S. government is doing all it can in this very childish way, I have to say, to try to block the participation of the Palestinian delegation at this moment. So, without regard to the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority, its overlap with the state of Palestine and with the PLO these days, all of that, the state of Palestine has a legal right to participate in all of this. And how do you talk about Palestine without Palestinians? That's the repeated U.S. sin over and over again. So it's an absurdity. And by the way, the U.S. government has granted a visa to al-Jolani of Syria, who is still on the U.S. terrorism list. But they don't grant a visa to their ally in Ramallah, right? So you can see the madness of this, and particularly when the centerpiece of this session is going to be Palestine. Now, there's a precedent from 1988. People will recall that the U.S. Tried to block Yasser Arafat from coming to address the UN General Assembly. At that moment, they got slapped down very badly, the United States, because the entire UN General Assembly agreed to move the session to Geneva, Switzerland, in order to allow Yasser Arafat to address the UN General Assembly. That was another time when the U.S. Further isolated and marginalized itself, did no harm to Palestine in the process. To the contrary, heightened the prestige of the Palestinian delegation in doing so. In this case, there has so far been no move to move the General Assembly to Geneva, although there are conversations behind the scenes. A part of that conversation is that they don't need to do so because there is a resident Palestinian delegation in New York that will be able to attend, and they have modern technology that wasn't available in 1988 to have the senior Palestinian delegation also address the General Assembly. I still think they should move to Geneva. I think the whole UN, it's long overdue to get it out of New York. It's not in the interest of the UN to be in the belly of the beast as it is. But even if they don't do so, they're not going to be able to silence the Palestinian voice. There will be Palestinian participation and people speaking on behalf of Palestine as well. And has the UN Secretary General done enough? Well, it is his job in the UN to try to make sure that the headquarters agreement is respected, the host country agreement is expected. So far, all of this has been happening behind the scenes with his spokesperson indicating that there are conversations going on with the host government, and we hope that they will respect it and so on. The General Assembly opened on the 9th of September, but the high-level week, the so-called general debate with the heads of state and heads of government, that's not until the 23rd to the 29th of September. So there could be further moves between now and then, but this is a very, very clear breach. And here's just the last thing I'll say on this. You know, the idea that, for example, the French and the Saudis would go ahead with their two-state solution conversations, as crazy as that is, in any event, without the senior Palestinian delegation present, this is not a solution for anything. This has been the problem of international diplomacy when it comes to Palestine. I hope that won't be the case.
Mm.
Well, Craig, you know, you said so many things there that I agree with. I mean, I'll just say for me personally, I don't recognize the Palestinian Authority or its legitimacy to represent Palestinians anywhere. They have their claim to represent Palestinians is null and void as far as I'm concerned, particularly as they collaborate with the genocidal regime murdering Palestinians. So I don't look at this as being about Palestinian representation. I don't consider them Palestinian representation. But I look at this from the perspective of what the UN claims to be, this world body that represents the world and that should be sovereign and should not be subordinate to Marco Rubio deciding which world leaders can and cannot attend. So, I mean, if the whole UN general, if the reason for not moving to Geneva is that, well, Mahmoud Abbas can join us by Zoom, then no one needs to come to New York. The whole thing can be done on Zoom. In other words, to me, it's shocking that Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, hasn't even commented on this publicly. I've been checking almost every day. I've seen nothing from him. And as you say, it all seems to be going on behind the scenes. And so it seems to me that by not moving it, they are acquiescing to the State Department deciding who can and can't come. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that, and then we'll let you go. But I just want to get your final comment about that aspect, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think not only should they move the session, the 80th session to Geneva, absolutely they should, because it's also important to make sure that the U.S. suffers the marginalization and isolation that it deserves when it makes these sorts of unlawful moves. That would be a very, very powerful signal. But the UN needs to get the hell out of New York permanently. You know, I worked in the UN in various duty stations, including in New York, and I can tell you that the worst host country on the planet is the United States for the UN. The atmosphere, the smears that come directly from the US government against UN personnel, harassment of people, delegates, and staff by immigration that you don't experience in other countries that host the UN. The massive financial costs for operating in New York City. And by the way, the UN brings billions of dollars in revenues to New York just by being there. So the US is benefiting and the UN is not. The prestige that it gets, the diplomatic access that the US gets, all of that it gets, in return, it sanctions UN officials unlawfully. It harasses them. It presents risks to their safety by firing up these sort of, far-right anti-UN voices and so on. So the UN does not belong in New York. The UN belongs, if you simply say the UN is moving, you can bet the bidding war amongst other countries in the world. And I would love to see it be somewhere in the global south and a bit more insulated from the machinations of the US empire. But anywhere else would be better. And you can bet there would be a huge bidding war offering things to the UN to move to countries from Europe, from Africa, and beyond. So it should move. I mean, Palestinian representation absolutely should never be left to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority technically has no voice in the UN. Foreign policy is supposed to be the business of the PLO, and the state of Palestine is the voice in the UN. The problem, of course, is the Venn diagram, where all of those things now overlap with the same personalities and the same power structures. I mean, that's for the Palestinian people to resolve. But I think there are a lot of folks in the world, especially in the world of international diplomacy, that would like to see the PLO become the PLO again. So this problem could be avoided. I don't know if I didn't say anything about the sanctions on the Palestinian human rights organizations. I didn't mean, Nora, to skip over that, but I know we're short on time, so I'm in your hands.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back and talk about this and other things, Craig. Just we're very grateful for all the analysis you do. I mentioned the article on Mondoweiss that gives people a lot of background on this Uniting for Peace initiative. I think it's an excellent primer. And then, is there anywhere else people can go to find out more, Craig? Or is your article a good starting point?
I think it's a good starting point. There are a lot of organizations now that have come together to try to push this forward. And there's a day of global action that's been called on the 18th of September. But this is an immediate term need. So anyone who wants to act on this, if we get to the 18th of September or a few days thereafter, and there hasn't been movement within the General Assembly on this, then we're going to know pretty well that, we haven't been able to mobilize the political will that's necessary. This is a short-term campaign. There are demonstrations planned in capitals around the world and in front of the UN, at least on the 18th and perhaps even before then, so folks can get involved. They can find information for that on my Twitter X feed, and with all the organizations that are involved. At least a dozen organizations and movements are now involved in this process, all centered on Palestinian civil society organizations that are in the lead, and the rest of us are working in solidarity with them.
Great.
Incredible.
Thank you so much, Craig. We'll be following it, and we look forward to having you back again soon. And in the meantime, we will continue to follow all your incredible analysis. Thank you so much, Craig.
Oh, thank you, Ali. Thank you, Nora, so much.
Thank you. Always an honor. Wow. It's always so good.
A lot to chew on.
So much.
Yeah.
So much. And before we get to Jon, we actually interviewed someone a couple days ago. Every Tuesday, a group of people, including the woman who we recorded this interview with, Sawsan, show up to the personal residence of Antonio Gutteres in New York City and lead a very, a really important protest, urging him to do something to fulfill his obligations as the Secretary General of the UN, to stop Israel's genocide. And they not only hold a protest every week, but they also deliver letters to Gutteres, telling him about his legal obligations, but also focusing on different aspects of Israel's genocide, whether it's the slaughter of so many children or the destruction of the healthcare system. They're diligent in their protests and their demands. And we actually, before we go to the interview, we have a couple of short video clips that Sawsan sent us. Let's go to one of those clips first.
UN, you're complicit. UN, you're complicit. Kids are dying every minute. Kids are dying every minute. UN, do your job. UN, do your job. Stop letting Gaza starve. Stop letting Gaza starve. To Mr. Antonio Gutteres, UN Secretary General, dated September 2nd, 2025. We are here another week. And 22 months later, into the genocide in Gaza. In the past 24 hours alone, Gaza's health ministry reported an additional 76 killed and 281 injured arriving at hospitals. At least 12 aid seekers were killed and 90 injured. This comes just a week and a half after the UN confirmed security phase classification, IPC report states.
So those are just some of the scenes over the last few weeks from protests in front of Guterres' house in New York City. Let's go to that short interview with Sawsan Samara. Joined now by Sawsan Samara in New York City, where she has been holding weekly protests on Tuesdays in front of Antonio Guterres' home, imploring the UN Secretary General to break his inaction on Israel's genocide in Gaza. Sawsan, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us where you are and why you started this weekly protest.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I am here today in front of UN Secretary General's Antonio Guterres' house, where I am coming every week at 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock. The actual protest is 6:30 till 7:30, but I sort of come, prepare, and make sure that, we have, because sometimes they try to block us, right? So I just kind of suss it out, make sure that we're prepared and the whole 9 yards. The reason I started coming is actually very complicated and a bit of a long story, but the short gist of it is it actually started with his inaction. It was a couple of weeks that he actually spoke nothing on social media or on stage, whatever, at the UN about Gaza, and we were demanding that change. But actually there was another layer, which is that Spain actually presented a UN resolution to the UN General Assembly resolution on June 12th. The UN General Assembly resolution had the Uniting for Peace language. We were informed by Mokhiber, which is an expert at the UN, that this is one avenue in which we can get the UN to act. So we actually all kind of followed his leads to try to act on that. On June 12th, the resolution had that language. It was voted majority votes, and the votes were actually 149 votes for yes. And the next step was the UN Secretary General was supposed to advocate and lobby for the countries to mobilize. Even though the resolution didn't have the actual language of saying like peacekeeping forces or military intervention, but it had the language of any measures to take any measures for the protection of Gaza. I would add what happened after following the news is our colleague Sam Husseini at one of the press conferences confronted the speaker, asking what is UN Secretary General doing now that we have this resolution? And the response was like, we're hoping for countries to mobilize. And this showed that there's no intention for action. I can even go further and say there's complicity. But what's clear is there was no intention for action. And this is when we started actually mobilizing. We gave him a couple of weeks, and then mid-July, we actually started coming to his house. Initially, we started twice a week, and then it became more and more, because it became regular, it became once a week. And the way we did it is a bit of, I want to say a bit of adding my style, because I used to work with international law. I am, international development staff. I worked with the UN a bit. I'm very familiar with the approach. We write a lot of reports, we pass a lot of reports. So the way we approached it is we actually submit a letter to him every week. We slip it under his door. And I can go into a can of worms of how that progressed and stuff like that. But let me stop for a bit there.
Sawsan, I'm so pleased to see you out there, and I'm really glad that you're focusing on Antonio Guterres, because for a long time I've been, absolutely horrified and very critical with his complicity. I do think that's the right word. And he hides behind this sort of benign image the UN has, but his complicity in this genocide is very clear, from repeating Israeli atrocity propaganda, his repeated condemnations only of Palestinian resistance and treating Israel very, very softly, and his inaction where he can act. We understand that the UN Secretary General's powers are limited, but he's not even using them to their full extent. And I wonder what motivates him. This is a man who is in his 80s. I don't know if he intends to run for another term. I don't think that would be usual. Presumably, he could retire very comfortably. So why is he so? I mean, do you have a sense from someone who has worked in the UN system of why he is such a coward and why he's so complicit and why he is so absolutely content to watch Israel mass murder Palestinians, carry out a Holocaust and a genocide, which, of course, that's another thing. He has never used the word genocide. What do you think drives this man who could be revered and respected by the world for taking a stand and instead debases himself with complicity with this crime of crimes? I'm just supposed to ask the questions, by the way, not editorialize. So
no, but
you want.
I love Ali, I joked with Nora about being able to count on you to label things the way it should be labeled. So I'm very happy this interview is happening because absolutely he is complicit. And absolutely he is being a coward, and absolutely he has not used the word genocide, even though we have an ICJ ruling since January 2024 that rules that this is a plausible genocide. It invokes the Genocide Convention, which means that we should all be using that word. For the longest time, I lived around the corner from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, the UN Secretary General. And I can tell you that from my observation, he was a routine man. He goes to work on time. He comes back. Comes back is a different story, but definitely in the morning, he was very consistent. I think I did notice after that UN General Assembly resolution that he started going to work late. And that was actually one of the reasons that triggered me to start doing these protests. Starting to go late to work is one indication that he is morally not consciously clear, I guess. It made me realize that he actually did agree not to do anything about Gaza, turn a blind eye to secure UN funding funding for the UN. Having said that, I do think he's not only doing the wrong thing for making such an immoral decision, but I do think the UN funding is going to deteriorate anyways, because there's inaction for one of the most obvious live streamed and the highest crimes of all crimes. We have presented to him at least 10 letters at this point. The first couple of letters were demanding 6 demands of things he can do and is not doing, including re-invoking Article 99 and calling for the UN Uniting for Peace resolution, UN's General Assembly Resolution 377. I would add also, like we also added advocacy, we also added pressure, we also added a lot of things that he could have done that he hasn't been doing. Around the 12th of August, actually, was last time we referenced the Uniting for Peace, because after that, Israel announced that they want to conquer Gaza. So if countries didn't take any action up until that point, it's very unlikely they will take any action after. If Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, didn't do his job in advocating for countries to take action up until this point, then I don't see why that will change after Israel announced the ground invasions. So that was kind of the time that we transitioned and we started talking about focusing on different sectors. So the first one was we would focus on children, and we actually started the display of children drawings, where actually the first couple of protests, we actually had children coming and coloring and writing about Palestine.
Have you seen him walk past that? Does he have to come past you?
So very good question. Up until this point, he's been avoiding us. So this is the security cars would drive by and they would keep driving by. And that was sort of the beginning. Now they know that we're here every Tuesday between 6 and 8, so they actually avoid us altogether. When they find that we're a small group, the security actually comes out and intimidates us and tries to
what do they say?
Get rid of us. I mean, there are all kinds of things, but one of which is you're trespassing. I'm calling the police. That's the 101 lines that they always start with. I had, we always slipped a letter under his door. Last week, they added a lip under the door so that we can't slip a letter anymore. There was this 1 week where we would slip the letter and they would slip it back to us. And they did this for at least 3 times. We had to slip it again 4 times. And we get all kinds of different reactions. There was this one time where we had a whole army of police. And it was honestly just 6 of us. And there were double number of police officers. And I can go on. I mean, the adventure continues, but so far he has not came out to address us. Let me add that at the beginning, every time we came out here, we saw direct action. So the first time we came out, he actually went after silence for 2 weeks or even 3 weeks, I would say. He actually came out and posted on social media about Gaza right away, like while we were out here. The second, after like maybe the second or the third time, like it was early on, we were demanding, trucks, UN trucks to go into Gaza. That was the context of the letter. And actually that evening, he announced that trucks will go in the next day, which, they tried to get him in. There was, I don't think it actually materialized the next day, but it materialized over the next few days. So we noticed that the pressure was working. And I think this is when we started seeing more resistance from the security, from, all these tricks that I talked about, because we noticed the momentum. The last week, the letter was focusing on the health sector. And I actually focused on one of the emerging diseases that we noticed in the West Bank and Gaza. What I wanted to say is not only the Gaza, but also the West Bank. So the disease is called, you just gotta pause for a second. So there are a surge of cases in Gaza of something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And it's basically an autoimmune disease. The Guillain-Barré syndrome, or known as GBS, is something that should be temporary, and it's not very common. You get 1 or 2 cases every 100,000 people. In Gaza, there are reported about 95 cases that were noticed since June. In the West Bank, I know of 4 cases that were reported in 1 week 4 years ago. And none of them are curable. The ones in the West Bank weren't curable. And this is not usually the procedure of GBS. GBS is very curable. Even if it's not, even if it doesn't go away completely, there are ways to manage it where you can function normally. But with the strand that the Palestinians are being exposed to, people are not getting their health back, basically. And these were the cases on the West Bank, the 4 cases on the West Bank. I'm sure if we start digging into cases, we'll find a trend in the West Bank, which indicates that there is something beyond just coincidence. I think this is something planned. There's a biological sort of weapon or chemical being spread. And I would presume it's most likely from the gases that they smell, that Israel, spreads. One of the cases, I can tell you for sure, we brought to the US. We exposed that particular person to the top doctors in the country. The best diagnosis we got was, it looks like a mutated form of GBS. And the best causation we got is it's very likely that it's some gas that they breathed, which led to that. That case is a person that's today paralyzed and does not function, and doctors are still trying to find a way to manage it. And I'll stop for a bit there. I can talk forever.
Yeah, I mean, all of these letters that you're sending, whether it's about children, the slaughter of children, or these, compounding health emergencies, and we had a doctor on a few weeks ago on the podcast, Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, who was talking about Guillain-Barré. It's an ascending paralysis, paralytic disease, and the cases are rising rapidly in Gaza. Has there been, any reaction? You talked about Gutteres, going to social media every once in a while and saying something, but, if he continues to ignore the letters, the protests, and his own, moral obligations as the Secretary General of this international body that was born out of the idea that genocides should never happen. Are you going to keep protesting, or are you going to give up and go home?
No giving up and no going home. The plan continues. It's not easy, especially that we are adding an intellectual layer that needs researching, demanding to invoke other international laws, one of which is actually the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention. I can name a few other that I triggered one way or another through different letters. But we will continue until we see tangible action, or we see that people are being held accountable. But this is the idea. We need to hold every single complicit person accountable. They let a genocide happen, that it was live streamed. We all knew the intentions. There's an ICJ ruling about it. It's unforgivable is an understatement, but they are complicit. They let it happen, and they need to be held accountable. Palestinian lives are not indispensable. International law is something that should be abided. Ignoring international law is not something that should just be okay in any way, shape, or form. So history will judge them, but we will continue to make sure that this will happen.
Sawsan, I'm so pleased you're doing this. I feel like these people are so isolated and above the reality of what they're complicit in. And I think it's so important to remind them directly of the human cost of their crimes and misdeeds, just as we spoke with Hazami Barmada near the beginning of the genocide, when she was leading protests outside the house of Secretary of State Antony Blinken. I'm very glad to see you outside the house of Antonio Guterres. On behalf of all of us, certainly on my behalf, you speak for me. and speak as loud as you can, because he needs to hear it. Thank you so much, Sawsan, and good luck to you, and perhaps we'll visit with you again. Let us know if, something dramatic happens, and we'd love for you to come back and tell us about it. Or if you get a response from him, or if he comes and talks to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. We will. Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you so much, Nora, for covering this and for giving me the opportunity to address this. And we will continue until we see some action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sawsan.
Thank you.
And again, that was an interview that we recorded on Tuesday as Sawsan and her comrades were outside Antonio Guterres' house in New York.
It was really good to see them there, and they're doing it every week in New York. So on Tuesdays, I think around 6 in the evening. Yeah. So maybe people who are in New York want to go and say hi or join in. And after we did that interview on Tuesday, I had not heard about the outbreak of Guillain-Barré to the extent that Sawsan mentioned it, and I actually looked it up, and there was a recent report from Medical Aid for Palestine about the sharp increase in Guillain-Barré syndrome in Gaza. This is a really horrible disease, particularly for young children, causing paralysis, severe breathing difficulties, and they say that 10 associated deaths have been reported in Gaza so far. This is a childhood disease that should be very rare, and it's now cropping up a lot in Gaza. Just another impact of that genocide, and just horrific.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad we were able to get Sawsan. And yeah, there's so many actions that people can plug into, and it's just a really good reminder that we don't have to be by ourselves in this. There are so many ways to be involved and stay involved and escalate our demands. So let's bring Jon on, talk about how the resistance has been fighting in Gaza and also in the West Bank, and Yemen as a support front. So give us a thumbnail of what you're going to be talking about today, Jon. Hi, Jon.
Yeah, many fronts. We're going to bring some West Bank news in today, some Yemen news in today, as well as focus on the battle in Gaza. The Israeli military is building up towards the second battle of Gaza City, which is still, I think, some weeks away. They talked about a symbolic beginning on October the 7th. But we'll remember that the Israelis already said that they controlled Gaza City. So it's this just whack-a-mole that they're playing, and every time they go back, they're erasing the history of Gaza. It's devastating to watch.
Yeah, all those high-rises, museums, cultural centers, libraries, schools, people's homes, parks, public spaces, everything that the people in Gaza had built themselves, not just over the last 20 years, but over the last 80 years, over the last, millennia of living and stewarding in that land. It's unimaginable. Anyway, that's all to say. Thanks,
Take it away, Jon.
Take it away.
All right. All right. You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 706 of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. I am reporting this on September the 11th. We're going to start with the maps. As always, I've got a migration map here, switch it up from the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs map. This is a map from the migration cluster that shows, you're looking at a map on the screen with, I don't know, what is it? Dozens of arrows showing all of the neighborhoods in Gaza City, wider Gaza City, and Jabalia as well. This map already assumes the ethnic cleansing of Beit Lahia in the north west there, Beit Hanun in the northeast, and also around the buffer zone all the way down to the south, where we know that Rafah has been completely ethnically cleansed. We learned today that the 36th Division of the IDF has pulled out of Khan Yunis, so that marking on the map showing Khan Yunis being taken over. Again, they've pulled troops from there. They've left a shadow force in Khan Yunis. We know from my reporting last week and leaks within the Israeli military to the Israeli media that they believed that Gideon's chariots, the operation that we watched carry on from the middle of May until the late summer, was a failure. It failed to accomplish its goals, but it did accomplish the genocidal goals of destroying entire villages in the Khan Yunis area. And what we're looking at here is the number of people leaving Gaza City. And this is a number that's being tracked by the International Organization for Migration. This is an UNRWA. This is a site cluster of a number of organizations, the Norwegian and Danish refugee councils. And they show on this map that since August the 14th, 97,000 people have left Gaza City. The Israeli military today, I mean, they're updating this number every day, the Israeli military, because they want to make that seem like everybody has left Gaza City. But as Nora reported in the newscast, there's a lot of people that are not going to leave Gaza City. They didn't leave Gaza City the first time when they were told to evacuate. People don't believe there's anywhere to go. It was difficult enough to push everyone out of Gaza City the first time when people had money and resources and gas in their cars. None of that exists now. The roads are destroyed. There's nowhere for their tents to go in the south. So it's a total genocidal disaster. And Israel's bragging about it this week. Netanyahu spoke before the Israeli Air Force and bragged about how they had knocked down 50 towers in the previous 48 hours. And he said to Gazans, get out of there. This is just the beginning. So again, this matches the genocidal plans that the Israelis have been speaking about since October 7th consistently, that they're going to turn Gaza City, a city that's 5,000 years old, into Rafah, which is completely erased at this point. Israel's Air Force said this week that they bombed Gaza more than 360 airstrikes in recent days, and that's a separate category than naval bombardment, than artillery bombardment, than the quadcopters dropping grenades on tents and homes. It's a separate category from the M113 armored personnel carrier robot bombs that they're sending in that blow up, that are tanks packed with explosives that blow up entire housing blocks. And so they're bragging and they're putting these numbers down on the record for the genocide trials. And I include these maps for those trials. And if we look at the next map, there's another one, another fresh map. This is from the United Nations satellite agency, and you can see the tents along the waterfront in precarious places. And on the right side of the map, you're looking at blue dots, yellow dots, red dots all along the coast. These are all tent camps all along the coast that are in, this was noted for being in a flood risk zone. But I want to show this map just to show you what the coastline of Gaza City looks like. It's packed with tents all the way up and down. And this is what Israel is trying to push people out of. There's one more map of this that shows, number 3, that shows the coastline as well. Just tents packed tight as far as you can see up and down the coastline. We take a look at the next map is the IDF's evacuation notice. Nora reported on similar leaflets that had been dropped on Gaza City. They're dropping them on individual neighborhoods. This one's forcing people out of the entire wider Gaza City and Jabalia area. So these are for the war crimes trials, because this is blanket ethnic cleansing. It's illegal in every possible way. And as I said, they're bragging about it. Netanyahu bragged at the Air Force base about dropping the towers. And I'm not going to show it to you because it's too specious, but the IDF released a video this week that was similar to the one they released about Shifa, the fake video of the Hamas command center under Shifa Hospital. They released another one of those about the high-rise towers in Gaza that house displaced people that already have all the windows blown out of them from previous attacks. And they showed them and said that they were terror towers and that they're destroying every one of them. And at the end of the video, it showed the whole area of Gaza City, the number of these towers that they are intending to knock out. And when they drop these towers, the towers are essentially entire neighborhoods in a tower. They're families, multiple generations of families in the towers. And it's because of the height of the towers, it's the amount of people living in there in the thousands. And so they've started this attack, this part of the war. As I reported weeks ago, the Israeli military drew down in Gaza at the end of Gideon's chariots, what they're calling part 1. And they haven't, they're building up, but they haven't started the invasion of Gaza City at this point. This is strictly a war on civilians, and there's no pretense of anything other than that happening. And it's just incredible. If people didn't see Nora's newscast, she showed some of the videos of the towers being dropped. And you can just see entire, hundreds of families' lives just go up in a plume of smoke. This is strictly a war on civilians. There are still resistance operations, and we are going to take a look at some of those now. Let's take a look at the map of the northern Gaza Strip. You can see Gaza City, Tel El-Hawa, the Shati refugee camp. Those are the areas under displacement orders. Shujaiya, Zaytun, largely destroyed up to this point in Gideon's Chariots 1. Tufa, the same. And the Israelis are essentially just demolishing block by block. They're not fighting the resistance. They're not trying to find the resistance to fight. They're just dropping civilian homes with no military pretext whatsoever. There was there was 7 Qassam operations this week. They hit in defensive positions, which is what we've seen from the resistance operations in the last few weeks since the end of Gideon's Chariots. The operations are breaching operations of Israeli positions. We saw that in Khan Yunis, a breaching operation of an IDF outpost. And we're going to see that again today. The Qassam operation, a video was just released just before we went on air, showing an operation, again, a hand-delivered explosive being placed inside the hatch of a tank. These are the high-quality operations that Qassam said that they were going to be executing. They've created new weapons, guerrilla action devices for these operations to deposit the explosive directly into the hatch of the tanks or the armored personnel carriers. And the field report came out this week from Qassam of the video that we won't see. I'll break it down for you next week because it just came out as we are going on air. But the field report, again, matches exactly what you see on the video. Qassam fighters, Qassam says, were able on Monday to raid a position where enemy soldiers and vehicles were fortified. One of our fighters was able to climb on top of the Merkava tank and throw a Bark guerrilla action device inside the cockpit, which led to the killing and wounding of the tank's crew. This occurred in the Al Omari area in the center of Jabalia City in the north of the West Bank. Our fighters observed the landing of the medevac helicopters for evacuations. This operation was clear that they had waited for the return of the tank to come back to their position after moving. And that is the time where their intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance would have shown in previous days that that's when they popped the hatch to get air in. When they're back in their outpost, they believe they're safe in their base, and the resistance attacked them. And that's what the preliminary IDF probe pointed out, that 3 Qassam operatives launched an attack on an army encampment in the Jabalia area around 6 a.m. The incident took place shortly after the troops had arrived at the outpost following their night activity. And they killed all 4 of the tank crew instantly, which the IDF acknowledged as well this week. Let's take a look at some of the other operations this week. This is in Jabalia, and they're calling these operations the Staff of Moses. This is to go This is the part of the battle renamed from the previous battle, which was Stones of David. We see the fighter here. He's saying, "We are the ones who pledged allegiance to God in struggle, and we will maintain this pledge to fight as long as we live." He then quotes a poem by Sudanese writer Muhammad Abdel-Bari. The poem ends, "And we will remain on the mountain of archers, and behind us the voice of the prophet shaking us. Do not leave, do not leave." And this is a poem that refers to the Battle of Uhud in the Quran, where the archers left their positions on the mountain. 50 archers left their positions, costing the Muslims the battle. We also saw that poem be used in 𝐄𝐥𝐿 during the second battle of 𝐄𝐥𝐿. So here we see fighters advancing on a tank from cover, behind cover. They fire a Yasin strike, a direct hit on the tank, and the fighter here, you're going to see he uses the smoke and the chaos of the strike on the first tent as concealment to now we see him running. We're with the cameraman here. The camera is on board with the fighter as he's running up to the armored personnel carrier and depositing the explosives into the hatch of the armored personnel carrier, attempting to put it in the hatch. And here we see the fighter returning to his base safely in this operation. It's a remarkable operation. There you see the guerrilla action device detonate in that operation. The fighters both return because you can see both cameramen in this operation in Jabalia. Again, you see it detonating there. A successful operation. Didn't go into the hatch. The hatch was locked on both of these operations. But here is the guerrilla action device. So now we're seeing another type of guerrilla action device. We've seen several of these throughout the war. At the beginning of the war, we were seeing them as Yasin 105 warheads that had magnets on them, and we saw the fighters go and stick them in between the turret gap, between the hull and the turret of the tank, and pull the pin, and the magnetic Yasin warhead sticks onto the tank and explodes. This is a different type that we're looking at here. I just wanted to draw your attention to it. They're able to adapt these weapons throughout the course of the war to carry out the operations that need to be, that they have seen an opening going into the war. They had many guerrilla action devices, but they were, like I said, magnetic. So they were presuming that you stuck them on the outside of the tank. But throughout the battle, the fighters had witnessed, we've all witnessed, Israeli tanks driving around with the hatch open and the commanders with their heads outside of the hatch, or while they're parked in their positions, the Israeli soldiers, the tank crew open the hatches to get air. And that left a vulnerability that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is now exploiting with these guerrilla action devices. And I just wanted to show you that they have a different type of one. The announced operation that killed 4 tank crew was a BARC, the lightning explosive device. And this is a different one that we're seeing here. In this next slide, you can see 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has pointed out this is the fighter returning to his base safely after depositing the guerrilla action device in the previous video that you saw. And it says, "In vain they try to uproot us, but we will sprout from the blood." And that's, again, Staff of Moses operations that are in opposition to, in defense of Gaza City and Jabalia. And we have another operation from this same series here. This one, you're going to see, we're watching now a fighter crossing through open space. There's a berm made by the Israelis to protect their tank, and we're watching the fighter here creep up the berm and walk. We're seeing a company of tanks and armored personnel carriers. There's the zoom in on him literally climbing up on top of the Namr troop carrier, and he attempts to open the hatch. And in the field report, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said the hatch was closed. So he's going to retreat here safely to his base, and the fighters are going to come up and launch Yasin strikes against those 2 tanks and Namr troop carriers. So we're seeing these actions. We've seen them. The Israelis are saying, the Israeli military is saying that these are new, bold actions. But people who have been watching the Resistance Report and watching the Resistance since the beginning of this war know the fighters have been bold all throughout this war. The guerrilla action device requires a boldness to affix it. And people even who watched the Second Intifada The boldness of Palestinians around Israeli tanks is something that starts very young. It's not just the resistance fighters, it's also the stone-throwing children who confront tanks in the previous generation of Israel's war on the Palestinians. But there you can see the green triangle is the Qassam fighter climbing up on top of the Namr. You see him there. Now he's up on top, and he's trying to get, there's 2 hatches on the top of the Namr, and he's trying to open those, and they are locked. And then we've seen this before too, firing rounds from small arms at the same time as they fire the Yasin. I believe that's to try to distract the active protection system, the trophy system that's on, or the Iron Fist in some cases, that the firing on the sensors messes that up. That is the belief of what is going on here. But the battle is, of course, beyond Gaza. It is also in the West Bank. This is a video of Zarah 𝐓𝐡𝐿 that they have put together. Interestingly, some look like they have captured Israeli military gear, which goes with an army radio report earlier this week that captured Israeli gear was found. These are also operations previously in the battle in northern Gaza, in the Tulkarm and Jenin camps, as well as Nur Shams camps, and it's a promo video that Zarah 𝐓𝐡𝐿's put out to say that we're here, we're on the battlefield, we're carrying out these operations, and it ends with saying, "Our struggle is ongoing, and we will continue to fight you until the liberation of Palestine, all of Palestine." And there was an operation today reported, a Shuja IED, named after the commander in the Tulkarm camp. He's from the Tulkarm camp, but he's the overall commander of Zarah 𝐓𝐡𝐿's in Tulkarm. That operation wounded 2 IDF soldiers inside a troop carrier, and today is 232 days of siege of the camps in Jenin, and it's been 8 months, full 8-month siege on those camps. Earlier this week, Army radio reported several Palestinians tried to return to the Jenin camp, which they have been expelled from, and the Jenin camp is in the process of being destroyed. They went back to look for belongings, and Israel shot and killed a number of them, which is exactly what Israel did in 1948 when they ethnically cleansed Palestine the first time. And they anyone coming back were called infiltrators. If they went back, Palestinians went back to try to get their belongings or to get some of their sheep because they had been driven out. They were killed by Israeli forces. And when you see that happening in Jenin, it definitely reminds you of that time. And just to give you a sense, though, in August, there was more than 180 clashes, stone-throwing clashes between youth and the Israeli military in the West Bank. These are happening every single day. Just a nutshell of a single day in September, September the 8th. There was an attack in occupied East Jerusalem that killed 7, 17 were wounded, but there was also clashes elsewhere around Jerusalem, but also in multiple places in Ramallah, multiple places in Jenin, multiple places in Tulkarm, in Nablus as well, and in Halil Hebron in the Al-Fawar camp. There's operations and clashes and resistance and refusing to submit operations going on in the West Bank all through the time that we're focused on Gaza in these reports. Of course, it's worth noting, of course, also that Israel's Operation Summit of Fire, the United States lured Hamas negotiators to Doha for a pretty sparse ceasefire agreement, and Israel used that opportunity to attempt to assassinate the Hamas leadership, but definitely destroyed the negotiations, which is just further proof that Israel is not interested in any kind of negotiation likely collapsing the negotiations entirely. No interest in their POWs. And we saw last week those POWs in a video released by 𝐓𝐡𝐞. 𝐓𝐡𝐞's shadow unit showed 2 of the captives being driven around Gaza City. And you can see these 2 captives, these 2 soldiers. We saw them previously in the middle camps during the ceasefire. And the 2 soldiers, they introduced themselves to each other in this 𝐓𝐡𝐞 video. And the soldiers say, "How did you get here?" 𝐓𝐶 wanted to show that these captives are being moved, and the captives are in Gaza City, and Israel doesn't care about that. Obviously, we've known that throughout this entire war, but the attack on Qatar and Doha definitely proved that point. Let's take a look at Yemen briefly here, because the Yemeni support operations are continuing. This is the map we've shown before. The yellow are the areas of Israeli strikes in so-called Houthi territory and Nasrallah territory, which is not a significant indicator. They control more territory than that map indicates. This is an Israeli map. But you can see the outer rings there. That's showing the range of the ballistic missiles and the drones, particularly the outer ranges that cover Israel are the Palestine 2 ballistic missile that we've been showing throughout the war, and the drone, the Yafa drone, which we saw penetrate Israel multiple times this week. 38 operations in the past 2 weeks, Abdul Malik al-Houthi said, 23 drone ops, and a number of ballistic missile operations that we can take a look at. One of those, let's take a look at number 12. This shows the graphic of where these drone operations targeted. The Air Force, the Yemeni Armed Forces carried out wide-scale military operations with several drones targeting multiple objectives across Israel. One drone targeted Ramon Airport, the international airport down in Eilat. That is on the bottom of the map that you see there. There was 3 drones towards two sensitive sites in the Negev. They don't say what those 2 sites are, but that's the there was reports in the Israeli press that there was sirens in the Dimona nuclear, around the nuclear facility, and also Navatim Air Base, which is the air base that's used for the attacks on Yemen and elsewhere. The attacks on Iran were from that base. Up, you could see up higher, there was the bottom dot is Ashdod. There was a drone attack targeting Ashdod. In Ashdod, there's multiple. There's a refinery and a power plant that are usually what the Yemeni Armed Forces is aiming at. And then up further, you could see Ben Gurion Airport as the target. The Yemeni Armed Forces said the Yemeni Armed Forces confirmed that they will escalate their military operations and will never retreat from the position of supporting Gaza, regardless of the consequences. Yemen was bombed yesterday. 35 people were killed, 150 wounded. The Yemeni Armed Forces also warn all aviation companies that airports inside occupied Palestine are unsafe and they will be consistently targeted. The armed forces of Yemen bear no responsibility for any consequences and stress the need for the immediate halt to all flights into these airports as they are no longer secure. This is part of the airport blockade. That's in addition to the naval blockade that the Yemenis have continued. Let's look at 13 because you can see the drone strike on Ramon Airport. It hit the passenger lounge. It was within feet of airliners. So obviously a direct hit that made it through Israeli defenses. And you can see that there on the Ramon Airport. Number 14 shows another drone that penetrated. This is an Israeli Apache helicopter, American Apache helicopter chasing IDF flown American helicopter chasing one of these Yafa drones. And you can see it shooting it down here at the end of this video. There was a number of reports from the ground in the West Bank this week and throughout Israel, people reporting watching the drones flying overhead. We saw that as well in the Lebanon front in the war. We saw the Israelis chasing drones around, and that's what we're seeing there. We look at number 15. There was also a qualitative development in the Yemeni front that was announced by Abdel Malik al-Houthi at the end of last month. The missile force announced the significant achievement of developing cluster warheads for the Palestine 2 missiles. These cluster warheads split into multiple warheads. That's on the re-entry vehicle. Abdel Malik al-Houthi says, a major qualitative achievement that has deeply alarmed the enemy. Sirens blared in over 200 locations and millions rushed to shelters, and air traffic was suspended at Ben Gurion Airport. So they have announced the use of cluster munitions in that warhead where the Kafia is. That's the re-entry vehicle. And inside of that are multiple warheads, which means that the air defense systems have to track a number of those missiles, a number of those warheads from the same missile. We can see that from civilian camera in number 16 here. This last video shows what that cluster munition looks like, and it makes it very difficult for the interceptors to pick each one out and to knock it out of the air as it's already entering. Most of these missiles, Israel is attempting to hit them in the outer atmosphere before they break apart like that. But that is a major development on the Yemeni front. So that is what has been going on in Gaza, the West Bank, and Yemen. And that is the resistance report for day 706 of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza.
Thank you, John. So much happened this week. And thanks for that overview, as always. And we have a lot to discuss. I always have questions for you, John, but maybe we'll hold them until after Asa's short segment, because we want to get through as much as we can. But thank you again for that fantastic overview. Just some spectacular videos this week. So Asa, you've returned to covering British politics recently. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that, and then we will come back for the full group discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Well, on the weekend we published my latest piece titled "Will Corbyn Allow Zionists to Sabotage Him Again?" And it's about the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's efforts to start a new political party and the divisions within that movement over Zionism and anti-Zionism. The left-winger and Palestine solidarity campaigner Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the then opposition Labour Party in 2015. And as readers of my book, Weaponizing Anti-Semitism, will know, Corbyn was relentlessly sabotaged by the State of Israel and its lobby for the following 5 years, despite coming close to power in the 2017 general election. He lost the 2019 general election and stepped down as leader of the party the following year. And then, in October 2020, he was removed as even a backbench Labour MP by pro-Israel party leader Keir Starmer, who is now the Prime Minister, for the sin of correctly stating that the issue of anti-Semitism had been exaggerated by his political enemies. But Corbyn didn't do himself any favours during the Israel lobby sabotage campaign. He softened his previous stances and tried to pander to the Labour Party's internal pro-Israel lobby, especially the Jewish Labour Movement, which is an explicitly Zionist group which acts as a proxy for the Israeli embassy in London. And you can see from this article that I wrote in October 2023, they actually claim credit for bringing down Corbyn. That's kind of been forgotten now because it was shortly before 7th of October they did this. You can read my book for all the details, but for example, in 2017, Corbyn's spokesman James Schneider told me and other media that Corbyn did not support the BDS movement, but only, quote, targeted action against Israeli settlements. Moreover, the party under Corbyn's leadership constantly suspended and expelled activists for legitimate anti-Zionist statements, which Israel and its lobby had falsely smeared as anti-Semitism. This never did Corbyn any good and only fueled the crisis, while expelling some of his closest and most high-profile allies, including Jackie Walker and the left-wing MP Chris Williamson. Now, of course, the biggest of these political guns was Ken Livingstone, the former mayor of London and an anti-racist pioneer. You may remember that in a 2016 BBC radio interview attempting to defend Corbyn, the former mayor accurately stated the historical fact that the Nazis had supported the Zionist Federation as one way to rid Germany of Jewish people in the 1930s. Livingstone was promptly suspended as a Labour member and spent 2 years in limbo, being constantly investigated and reinvestigated by the Labour Party machine, before ultimately being persuaded in 2018 by Corbyn's allies to drop his legal battle and quit the party. Now, if you speak to Corbyn's closest allies today, they'll still tell you that they tried to secretly defend Livingstone behind the scene. But here's a clip of what Corbyn himself at the time actually said. If we can play that.
Jeremy Corbyn, you've had to suspend a close friend, a very close ally. How did that feel?
My job is to lead the party. My job is to ensure the party, all members of the party behave in an appropriate way. There were concerns about the language used by Ken Livingstone, as there were of one or two other people, and so a number of people, a very small number of people, I have to say, in the entire party membership have been suspended pending investigation. We're not tolerating anti-Semitism in any way, or indeed any other kind of racism within the party. It's not acceptable and not allowed.
Ken Livingstone was and is a very close friend. How did you feel doing what you've done?
Obviously very sad, but I have a responsibility to lead the party.
So that clip notably was from the 28th of April 2016, the very same day Livingstone was suspended. So there we have it. You know, there were concerns about the language used by Ken Livingstone. We're not tolerating anti-Semitism in any way. It's obviously very sad, but our responsibility to lead the party. So, you know, for all of the kind of revisionism now where they're saying that they secretly were trying to defend him, Ken Livingstone publicly, they were condemning him. Corbyn threw his closest allies under the bus and ruinously tried to coddle his biggest enemies in the pro-Israel lobby. And these two factors played a major role in Corbyn's ultimate departure from the party. So now there's talk of a new left-wing party. It's no wonder that many of Corbyn's supporters want a more assertive approach this time round. In July, Zarah Sultana, a younger left-wing pro-Palestinian backbench Labour MP, dramatically announced that she was quitting Labour to co-found a new socialist party alongside Jeremy Corbyn. She said this is part of her statement, quote, "Across the political spectrum, they smear people of conscience trying to stop a genocide in Gaza as terrorists. But the truth is clear. This government is an active participant in genocide, and the British people oppose it. In 2029, that's when the general election is expected to be next time. In 2029, the choice will be stark, socialism or barbarism." So right away, Sultana has come out fighting on the issue of the anti-Semitism smears that were used against Corbyn. Here's what she said last month when the journalist Matt Kennard asked her about anti-Semitism smears and about Zionism.
One of the things we have to be honest about was some of the mistakes that were made under the Corbyn period, and adopting the IHRA was a mistake. Conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism was a mistake, so much so that one of the lead authors, Kenneth Stern, has criticised it and has criticised organisations and anyone who decides to adopt this policy. I am an anti-Zionist. I always have been. Anyone who visits the occupied West Bank, anyone who sees the genocide happening in Gaza, anyone who learns about the Nakba, anyone who understands what settler colonialism is, will find themselves also identifying as an anti-Zionist, and the political...
Thanks. When the corporate media and the pro-Israel lobby then proceeded to smear her instead of backing down or apologizing, she actually doubled down and she posted this on Twitter X. The smears won't work this time. I say it loudly and proudly. I'm an anti-Zionist. Print that. That tweet was addressed to Dominic Pina. Don't know how you pronounce his name. Dominic Pena. He's a Telegraph journalist. He wrote a story about her. And she posted this to X, Twitter, only a few hours after coming out as an anti-Zionist in her discussion with 𝐤𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐿. Now, if only Corbyn had such an uncompromising attitude, he may even have become Prime Minister in 2017. And yet, unfortunately, it seems that Corbyn and his team have still not learned anything from their mistakes. In an interview with Middle East Eye soon after Sultana's comments, he said this. Got a couple of clips for you.
Is your approach going to be different this time? And the reason I ask this is that Zarah Sultana did a recent interview where she said that the Labour Party leadership was wrong to have adopted the controversial IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And she said the smears won't work anymore and that she's proudly an anti-Zionist. What do you think about all that?
Well, I think it wasn't really necessary for her to bring all that up in the interview, but that's what she decided to do. I was under a great deal of pressure to adopt the IHRA. That happened. The majority of the National Executive, a huge majority, including people who are very close to me, wanted it adopted, and that was duly done. And then later, the examples were also adopted, which I personally had the greatest concerns about.
Now, we've cut that interview down there. It's quite long, but if you watch the whole answer, he doesn't answer the point about anti-Zionism, what his view on Zionism is. He just sort of skips over that part. And because of that, Corbyn came under quite a lot of criticism online from left-wingers and anti-Zionists. And one notable Palestine solidarity activist even asked Corbyn about it in person. We've got that clip as well.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Can I just ask one question, please? Will you be coming out like Zarah Sultana and declaring yourself as an anti-Zionist? No, I'm just an activist.
We're not doing any.
I'm
here to speak about Gaza. I'm here to speak for the Palestinian people.
I just want to know as a member
I'm sorry.
of the party.
I'm here to speak for the Palestinian people and speak in solidarity with them. That's the point of being here today. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Yemi has two. She was just asking one question. Did he give you an answer?
No, and I just want to know as a lifelong.
We can have a conversation.
Now, asking Corbyn that question was an activist called Anika Zahir, or she's known as Annie Says on TikTok and Instagram. She's a regular at Palestine solidarity demonstrations all across the country. I've met her a couple of times, and she posts really useful grassroots updates from on the ground. And that interaction sparked a lot of controversy on X online. Some Corbyn supporters said it was unfair given his years of Palestine solidarity work, while critics said he should have been able to answer a simple question. So I'm not going to get into all the weeds now, but there's actually a lot more detail in my article about a potential split in the new party, the new left-wing party, which actually doesn't technically exist yet. And Corbyn himself is reported to be furious that Sultana took the initiative to launch the move for a new party last month. After she did do so with that tweet, as we showed earlier, it took Corbyn 3 weeks to agree to a joint statement with her announcing the so-called Your Party initiative, which is set to found the new party at a conference later this year. There's a lot more details in the piece, so you can read that there.
Thanks so much for that, Asa. Ali, what's your take on Corbyn's, I don't know, wishy-washiness in this moment?
First, it was a great article, Asa, and I highly recommend people reading it. And it's really not about revisiting everything that happened in the past 10 years with the Zionist campaign against Corbyn, the successful Zionist campaign against Corbyn and the Labour Party.
Yeah.
But it's about learning the lessons. And to me, it's just astonishing to see Corbyn. I think some of us have said, oh, Corbyn doesn't know how to be tough. But that video clip you showed us demonstrated he can be tough against his friends and supporters.
That's
not
thing.
Against his enemies.
Yeah.
And the message, what I got from your article, Asa, is that, well, to the extent that there's any route to changing things through electoral politics or British electoral politics, that's a separate debate. But to the extent that people want to be able to vote for a party that stands for the things that they want, it's striking to me that Zarah Sultana is standing up and saying, I'm willing to carry the banner and say the things that people are saying in the grassroots, that people have been saying for years, and that Corbyn is still not willing to say. And so the question to me is, that's fine. If Corbyn doesn't want to do that, he doesn't want to take those positions, obviously that's his choice. But then let someone who is willing to stand for the things that people want to see, let her take the lead and see where it goes. Because the process of constant appeasement and constant accommodation of unappeasable, fanatical, literally genocidal Zionists clearly didn't work for Jeremy Corbyn. It didn't. He wasn't able to keep his grip on the Labour Party, and it didn't win electorally. It lost. So what's the point of repeating it? And I think it's worth simply putting that all out there now before people waste a lot of time and energy. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's not about just rehashing the past for the sake of it. It's, it's about what's going to happen in the new party. Are they going to expel or suspend or investigate members for saying Israel's carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza? Because that would be a comparison to the Nazis. Are they going to investigate people for saying similar things to what Ken Livingstone said? Is there certain parts of history that we're not allowed to talk about because it might hurt Zionist feelings? So I think people want answers to that.
Yeah, and I'll just say we'd love to have Jeremy Corbyn on the live stream or on the Electronic Intifada podcast to discuss all these questions openly. I think that will be really an opportunity to clear all these things up.
Yeah.
And also, I am seeing, and I want to mention this just in the comment, that people shouldn't take this as sort of dismissing Jeremy Corbyn. People have a lot of affection for him. I do. He's continuing to speak out for Palestinians. He's continuing to speak out for Gaza. He chaired the Gaza Tribunal. Our friend Abu Bakr Abed, when we spoke to him last week on the live stream, he was in London and he spoke next to Jeremy Corbyn on that tribunal. I personally appreciate all of that. But if you're going to get into an electoral fight to stand for these things, these other issues cannot be sidelined. They have to be addressed head on. And the failure to learn the lessons is what, people need to know. And if you're wrong about that, Asa, they can prove you wrong by simply answering those questions we saw people asking and being clear about positions on these fundamental issues.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, thanks. We'll be waiting for that invitation to be accepted, of course. Ali, there are some discussion topics that we wanted to get through, and this is a story that you and Asa and Tamara have been tracking for years. Elizabeth Surkoff was released from 900 days in some sort of captivity. What is the significance of this story? Remind us who Elizabeth Elizabeth 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is and why it's important to remember what she has done.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. Elizabeth 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is a Russian-born Israeli, and as you said, she was captive in Iraq under rather mysterious circumstances for 903 days, and just yesterday apparently was returned to Israel. She was also a graduate student at Princeton. As we can see, the president of Princeton University issued a statement welcoming her release, saying it brings relief and joy to the university community and that we celebrate she will be reunited with her family. President Christopher Eisgruber of Princeton actually thanks President Trump for her release, but it's also clear from some of the media reports coming out that the circumstances surrounding her release are rather murky. We can see the Wall Street Journal reporting yesterday, the headline there, Princeton doctoral student freed after being kidnapped in Iraq, that Elizabeth 𝐓𝐶𝐞's ordeal began more than 2 years ago when the Princeton University PhD candidate was kidnapped from a cafe in Baghdad where she had gone to carry out field research. I'll come back to that because that's a big question. It says that her ordeal ended Tuesday when she appeared unexpectedly near the American embassy in Baghdad, showing the wear and tear of her 903 days in U.S. captivity. A U.S. official said her release was announced on Truth Social by President Trump, who said she'd been held by Kataib Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militia, and is now safely in the American embassy. She's not a U.S. citizen, by the way, but the U.S. has treated her almost as if she is, for the purpose of trying to get her out. As the Wall Street Journal acknowledges, the circumstances of 𝐓𝐶𝐞's release are unclear. Adam Boehler, the U.S. Special Envoy for Hostage Response, traveled to Iraq earlier this year to seek the help of Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, who had been eager to preserve a modicum of American support for fear that Islamic State might make a comeback. 𝐓𝐶𝐞's sister Emma, who is an American citizen, mounted an intensive campaign to draw attention to her plight, imploring the Iraqi prime minister during one of his visits to Washington to do more to help free her sister. And then it says that after 𝐓𝐶𝐞 was freed, Sudani, the Iraqi prime minister, sent a letter to Trump saying that her release was a gift for Trump. According to senior administration officials, Sudani didn't mention the letter in a social media post Tuesday. There's some interesting revelations or tidbits from the Israeli media. Tal Schneider, an Israeli journalist, pointing to a story from the Times of Israel in Hebrew that says that her release came about thanks to the tremendous efforts of Adam Boehler, that's the U.S. hostage negotiator, and the family representative, Mickey Bergman. The Israeli side, meaning the government, had almost no hand in the matter. If anything, they were aiming at other interests in the region and haven't achieved them so far. So says Tal Schneider. And Avi Sharf, who is a journalist with Haaretz and the former editor of its English edition, writes, commenting on the Times of Israel story, the amazing detail here, Elizabeth's sister received significant updates ahead of the release and hid them from Netanyahu's representative Gal Hirsch, who was only updated after the fact about the release. So that again just points to, I'll just throw this out there now, we won't spend a lot of time on it, but points to the Israeli government's consistent lack of interest in freeing its citizens who are in captivity. They are abandoned by this government, whether they're in Gaza or Elizabeth 𝐓𝐶𝐞 in Iraq. Now, some interesting news from Iran's Tasnim news agency, reported by Al Mayadeen, that says that 𝐓𝐶𝐞's release in Iraq came as part of a swap deal that secured the freedom of Lebanese civilian naval officer Imad Amhaz, who was abducted by Israel last year during its war in Lebanon. According to the agency, the exchange was the outcome of special efforts and resolved a case that had remained unsettled for over a year between Iraq, Lebanon, and Israel. So we don't know all the details, but clearly something went on. Now, the question about who 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 is, this is really interesting. As I noted, she's Russian-born, moved to an Israeli settlement at a very young age with her parents. As she grew up, she worked for the right-wing Zionist politician Natan Sharansky. She was in Israeli military intelligence during the 2006 Israeli war in Lebanon and remained in the reserves till about 2018, I believe. She went to Hebrew University, and then she came to the University of Chicago to do a graduate degree, and then she went on to Princeton to work on her PhD. Now, many of us knew of her for many years. She was active on social media, supporting so-called Arab Spring uprisings, especially in Syria. As we document in our article, she expressed anti-Shia sectarian views and aligned herself with the US Israeli-backed insurgency in Syria, which, as we know, eventually did overthrow the government of Syria in December. And she often bragged about being, and this is very strange for an Israeli, she bragged openly about being in direct contact with and acting as a confidant for members of these Syrian Salafi groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who were engaged in this insurgency. And in fact, she revealed, or she did, I can't remember if she was the first, but this was the most comprehensive at the time in 2018 confirmation that Israel was arming and funding some of these rebel groups in Syria. You see the headline there from Foreign Policy and her byline, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, in 2018. And she wrote this article headlined, "Inside Israel's Program to Back Syria's Rebels." Now, what's very interesting about her is that, again, I'd been following her on social media for years. She claimed for years to struggle with Arabic. And we document this in the article Tweet After Tweet, where she says, "I've been learning Arabic for years. I can't pick it up. It's so difficult. I'm bad at languages." And, to be honest, it's very hard to learn a new language as an adult. I've been learning Turkish for a few years, and it's like it's a struggle, and you feel that. So I can sympathize with her. But then take a look at this video of her in Iraq, which is just absolutely extraordinary. And this would have been, some not very long before she disappeared in March 2023.
السلام عليكم ست.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
بما أنك صحفية وصفي لنا صلاة الجمعة، شنو رأيك فيها؟
صلاة الجمعة يعني بمدينة الصدر معروفة جدا كحادث تاريخي له يعني جذور من التسعينات، فحبيت أحضر هاي صلاة الجمعة بالضبط بهذا الجامعة بسبب تاريخه
يعني جئت مدينة الصدر؟
إيه.
الكوفة ما رايحة للكوفة؟
رحت الكوفة سابقا.
زمن سيد الشهيد
لا يعني
زمن سيد مقتدى الصدر.
ايه بالضبط، يعني أنا صغيرة بالعمر، يعني مو لي هاي الدرجة إنه قدرت أروح بأيام الكوفة. ايه ف هذا المكان، يعني هذا مدينة الصدر هي معروفة حتى من ناحية دولية كمكان اللي ولد ثورات وانتفاضات، وخاصة هذا الجامع
يعني رمز للشجاعة.
ايه للشجاعة ومقاومة ضد أي ظالم، يعني ظالم إذا هو يعني محلي مثل صدام أو دولي مثل أمريكا.
I mean, the Israeli comes out in her, there's a lot of like, but
yeah, but this is
it.
extraordinarily fluent Arabic. And if you listen to the rest of the interview, with an Iraqi accent. She speaks like Iraqi dialect. It's extraordinary. And, it's totally incongruous with the image she presents on social media over years, again documented in our article from 2023, of just being completely unable to learn Arabic. I mean, you could learn Arabic at that level, but it would take real immersion. And in her social media, there is no evidence of that. She never says, I'm taking, she's very open, but she never says, I'm taking, this deep immersion class in Arabic. It's just very strange. In any case, what was she doing in Iraq? When it was revealed in 2023 that she had disappeared in Iraq, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and many others claimed that she was in Iraq doing research on her Princeton University PhD. But this could not have been true. And we document this in the article because Princeton University very strictly prohibits any university related business, including research for any degree program in Iraq and a small number of other countries that it calls Category X countries, because they're just too dangerous. And we lay this all out in the article that it was absolutely forbidden. They say, even if you make a personal visit to one of these countries, no matter who it's paid for, you are prohibited from doing any university-related business. So this story that we see repeated, that she was there doing research for Princeton, cannot be true. But despite that, there's at least one report that we cite in the article of someone who met her in Iraq, who said she presented a university ID in order to gain credibility. And she was trying to meet leaders of the Iraqi resistance and the Sadrist movement, whom she opposed. These Shia leaders that she had very strong views against. Why is an Israeli researcher going to Sadr city and trying to meet them? It's extraordinary. And she also had other very unexplained travels to other parts of Iraq and to Lebanon as well, where Israelis are prohibited from entering, both by the Israeli government and the Lebanese government. And she had criticized other Israelis for meeting with Arabs in Arab countries where such contacts could put those people in danger. But she went ahead and did this in at least Iraq and Lebanon, as mentioned, concealing her true identity and often using false or altered names and presenting herself as a Russian and not Israeli. So it's a very mysterious story. We don't know, be interesting to see what she says about it if she decides to speak publicly, and if we'll ever get real answers as to what she was actually doing in Iraq and in Lebanon.
Well, I can take bets.
Ali, we had a lot of people in the comments asking what she said in that video, in that conversation in Iraq. I believe she was essentially she was presenting herself as a supporter of Sadr, right?
Very much so. I mean, we do go into that in our article, so I'll refer people to that. Maybe Tamara, you can put it up again so people can see the headline, and I'll read it. But yeah, she's going to gain the confidence of these people she views as enemies, and so she says she praises Sadr, the leader of this Muqtada Sadr, the leader of this significant Shia movement in Iraq, and she says that he's taking good positions against all oppressors, including the United States, who she names as an oppressor, even though she's a full supporter of American military intervention in the region, especially in Syria at that time. Tamara, if you could just put the headline back up again, so that I can just read it for people who are listening. What we know about 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞, and this was an article written by myself, by you, Tamara, and by Asa, that we published at the Electronic Intifada in July of 2023. She disappeared in Iraq in March, but this became public knowledge or widely shared knowledge a couple of months after she disappeared.
Well, thanks for that. We will continue to follow that story. Thank you. And we have two actually like good news stories. There's one in Spain and one in Western Canada. Ali, take us through what happened in Spain, why it's significant.
Yeah, actually, this relates to several EU countries, but we'll start in Spain, where there was a very recent announcement by the Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. Let's listen to a few seconds of that.
España ha decidido dar un paso más y poner en marcha de forma inmediata 9 acciones adicionales para detener el genocidio en Gaza, para perseguir a sus ejecutores y para apoyar a la población palestina.
So
9
what?
acciones que me gustaría compartir.
Yeah. So what the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is announcing there is 9 additional measures to be taken by Spain to stop the genocide in Gaza. Those are his words. You could hear them there in Spanish, if you could understand it, to prosecute its perpetrators and to support the Palestinian people. And this includes legally consolidating, he says, urgent approval of a royal decree law that legally consolidates the arms embargo on Israel that has been in place since October 2023, establishing a legal and permanent ban on the purchase and sale of arms, ammunition, and military equipment to that country, a ban on transit through Spanish ports for all ships carrying fuel for the Israeli armed forces, denial of entry into Spanish airspace of all state aircraft transporting defense material destined for Israel, a ban on access to Spanish territory for all persons directly involved in the genocide, human rights violations, and war crimes in Gaza. And so those are all, good things, definitely a good start. But this is very significant too. A ban on the import of products from illegal settlements in Gaza and the West Bank with the aim of combating these occupations, stopping the forced displacement of Palestinian civilians, and keeping the two-state solution alive. He also announces some additional aid for Palestinians. But on that settlement ban, it's interesting that Ireland, which should have taken the lead on this with its occupied territories bill, still has not implemented this, and Spain has now come out ahead of it. I did try to look for any small print. I couldn't find it. I was even digging through the Spanish government's official gazette to see if I could find anything, and I haven't yet, to see, number one, when this ban on settlement goods would begin, how it will be enforced, whether it includes services as well as goods. We've learned with announcements from all these governments, you really have to read the small print, but this is definitely a step in the right direction. And as you can imagine, Israel is not happy. So we can see a headline here from the Times of Israel that Spain recalled its ambassador from Israel in the last few days after the Israeli foreign minister accused Madrid of anti-Semitism, because it's officially declaring, and that is significant, that Spain now, like Ireland, is officially declaring this a genocide. But the Israeli abuse and predictable reaction does not seem to be deterring others from following suit. So the news broke today that the government in the Netherlands, which is a caretaker government because the cabinet has collapsed, but nonetheless, it will, as this report shows, will introduce a national import ban on goods from illegal Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territory as soon as possible. Caretaker Prime Minister David Van Veel, caretaker Minister of Foreign Affairs David Van Veel, said in a parliamentary debate on Wednesday. And last week, Belgium made a similar announcement. It announced 12 specific sanctions that it will impose on Israel. And Foreign Minister of Belgium, Maxime Prévost, said that this will include a ban on the import of products from illegal Israeli settlements and a review of public procurement policies with Israeli companies, which is also very significant because several Israeli or Israeli-linked firms have had significant roles in European infrastructure projects over the years. So this all goes to show that these are all governments that supported the genocide. These are all governments that came out after October 7th and fully adopted Israel's atrocity propaganda narrative and supported its attack on Gaza as so-called self-defense. So the fact that they're moving in this direction, and recall the discussion we had with Craig Mokhiber earlier, is, I think, due to the pressure from their populations, and that has to continue. A ban on settlement goods should have been done decades ago, and it needs to include services. And really, what's the logic? Looking at this not as Ali Abu Nimer, but as the EU. The EU has basically banned all trade with Russia, saying that that's necessary to stop the war in Ukraine. Well, why doesn't the same logic apply to Israel? If you have to stop all trade with Russia, all transport links with Russia, all banking relationships with Russia, because any such commerce helps Russia prosecute its war with Ukraine, that's the EU's argument, then why doesn't the same logic apply to Israel? And therefore, European publics in all these countries should be demanding a total ban on trade and transportation links to Israel. And not just the passage of Israeli military or transport or government aircraft through European airspace, but all Israeli aircraft, because we know that Israel uses commercial passenger aircraft to carry weapons through the airspace of these countries. There was a report from The Ditch, the Irish publication a few weeks ago, about weapons parts even being carried for Israel aboard Aer Lingus flights, which is absolutely astonishing, and as well, of course, as Israel using its own national airlines for these purposes. So this is all a good start, but much more, and full credit to European people, not their governments. Keep up the pressure, but it's great to see that pressure starting to pay off. Don't let up. Don't be satisfied with this.
Yeah. And here in the belly of the beast, the Palestinian youth movement, which has spearheaded the Mask Off Mersk campaign last year, just announced a new campaign focusing on weapon shipments to Israel through Oakland International Airport, my local airport here in the Bay Area. And so we're all, I think, through FedEx planes. And so we're going to be speaking with some of the researchers of that campaign coming up in the next few weeks. It's so integrated into Europe and the United States and Canada's economic matrix. And people are exposing these links, and they are trying to stop it in whatever ways they can. And now turning finally to Western Canada.
Forehead of the beast, because if Oakland is the belly of the beast, then I think Canada is the forehead of the beast.
The receding hairline of the beast?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I won't talk about receding hairlines. But another credit to the grassroots, to the people who are making things happen. This actually happened at the end of August, and I've been wanting to talk about it. But the city of Burnaby in British Columbia voted unanimously, the council there, to become an apartheid-free community. And you can see that this is from Apartheid-Free Communities. This is from Apartheid-Free Communities Canada, or BC, I think, their Instagram account celebrating this victory. And you can see this story from the CBC, the Canadian government broadcaster, even covered the story, and they did so quite well. The headline, as we can see there, is Burnaby Council votes unanimously to ask Ottawa to impose arms embargo on Israel. And just a few snippets from this, that the councillors there in Burnaby, BC, voted unanimously have unanimously passed a motion calling on the federal government to impose a two-way arms embargo on Israel amid the current war in Gaza. The motion from Councillor Alison Gu asks Burnaby Mayor Mike Hurley to write to the federal government and request that the federal government stop the export and import of all military goods between Canada and Israel. And it commits Burnaby to the signing of the Apartheid-Free Communities Pledge. And by doing so, they become the first community in Canada to call for a two-way arms embargo on Israel. Councillor Alison Gu, who sponsored this initiative, said, our constituents have been speaking to us, coming to us, saying that they feel just completely let down by other orders of government in the lack of action on this. She told the CBC's On the Coast before the meeting. So again, showing how it is pressure from below that is pushing these initiatives. And Gu, and again, this really is so important. And the fact that the CBC even reported this, I was amazed. She said the motion was motivated by recent analysis that showed that arms from Canada are still flowing to Israel, despite the federal government's insistence that no arms have been shipped to the country since January 2024. She says the data was uncovered by a group of researchers from 4 NGOs, World Beyond War, the Palestinian Youth Movement, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and Independent Jewish Voices. They found entries in the database of the Israel Tax Authority that show Canadian goods continuing to enter Israel, described by the Israeli government as military weapons parts and ammunition. So again, that shows how these groups that we've talked to many of them, to many of these activists on this program, how they're having a direct impact now on policy. And kudos and congratulations to them and to everyone who made this happen. And I'll just remind people, back in March, we spoke with 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 of Vermonters for Justice in Palestine about the Apartheid-Free Communities initiatives in Vermont, where 5 towns earlier this year became the first communities in the United States to adopt the Apartheid-Free Community Pledge. So go back and check that out. The headline there for the story in the Electronic Intifada, and you can find all the videos, is Vermont Victory Against Israeli Apartheid. And if you want to find out how to start such a campaign in your community, that's assuming you don't already have one, and I would be shocked if anyone watching today isn't already part of such a campaign. You can go to the website apartheid-free.org, and we're showing that on the screen there, and find out more about this campaign and resources and communities that are involved and so on.
I don't know if John, as the resident Canadian, has any Canadian cultural, greetings that you can send to the people in Burnaby, but
I'm in Canada in physical presence only. But I'm glad that these initiatives are happening, and that report that was put out by the PYM was an excellent report, and definitely shone light in a place that the Canadian government and corporations were hoping to have hidden. So good to see, and let's have that spread across communities, because it's pretty obvious 706 days in that our governments aren't going to suddenly do something that they haven't done in 2 years or 75 years in most cases. Canada was an integral part of the establishment of the State of Israel and has been one of its biggest backers throughout its existence, which incidentally is less time than many of the grandparents in Gaza that are being forced out of their houses right now.
Indeed. Thank you for that. And again, it's apartheid-free.org, I believe, Ali, if that's right. Yeah, apartheid-free.org/pledge to get involved and either join or start a campaign in your local community. Let's finally take a look at the website. we've been publishing a lot this week. Abu Bakr Abed published a couple pieces in the last 10 days, I believe, one of which was with you, Ali, that we talked about last week. We have a new piece by Malik Hijazi that I was honored to feature in the news report at the beginning of this broadcast. Several new newsy items by our colleagues Dave Cronin and Michael Brown. There's Dave's report on the University College Dublin teaming up again with Israel's 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿, even though the country itself is looking at boycott measures.
David broke this story. David is Irish, and so he follows events in Ireland very closely. He broke this story, and it's already been picked up in media in Ireland.
Yeah.
And I'll just say that, some time ago, he broke a similar story about the University of Galway and its links with the Israeli death machine, let's say. And as a result of his story, student activists learned about that. They didn't know about it. And thanks to their pressure, they actually got that canceled. So maybe that will happen again, but that just goes to show that our colleague David Cronin is uncovering a lot of things that those in power don't want us to know. And people are using that information to get results. And that is exactly the power of the kind of independent journalism we do. So well done, Dave. We're waiting to see similar results with UCD as happened with Galway.
Yes, absolutely. And Michael Brown wrote a post this week about the New York Times. He is our resident corporate Western media follower. He sacrifices a lot to.
He watches,
so that we don't have to.
and it's important to document
Yes.
how the misdeeds and the role they play in propaganda. But my blood pressure cannot take watching
I can't do
CNN
it.
or reading the New York Times beyond a certain level. How Michael does it, I don't know, but we're all the beneficiaries because he
Yes.
writes really good analysis as this piece about the New York Times.
That's right. Thank you, Michael. I want to highlight a special podcast interview that I did a few weeks ago, but we published it just yesterday. A poet in Gaza. She's 20 years old. Diaries of a Young Poet in Gaza. Batul Abu Aklin is the name of the episode. It's up now on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud. But I interviewed Batul plus two co-editors of a new anthology of writings from 4 young women in Gaza called Voices of Resistance. Batul is an extraordinary poet and writer. She's a translator. She's won all of these poetry awards in the last few years. She's absolutely spectacular. She just came out with her own book of poetry. And we were really, really honored to be able to interview her. Yeah, that's her own book of poetry called 48 kilograms. It's extraordinary. And she reads us one of her poems that is just absolutely devastating. So please go watch or listen or read Batul's interview that we did along with James Harker and Basma Gallieni, who are the co-editors. Basma herself grew up in Gaza. Just an extraordinary hour that I got to spend with all 3 of those wonderful people. And everything else that we've published on EI in the last week. And of course, donate, likes, share, subscribe to keep this publication and this live stream going. Ali, did you want to thank some people?
Yeah, and I just want to say, especially please share the pieces by our writers in Gaza. The piece by Malik Hijazi there is nowhere left to go, we are trapped, really captures, I mean, to the extent that words can capture the utter horror that we're seeing and hearing from so many of our friends who are in northern Gaza, that they're experiencing now, the sense that they are in imminent danger where they are, but there is nowhere to go. And how do you even decide what to do in a situation like that, where moving may be impossible? Maybe people need to know about this reality. So please share, particularly the writings of our colleagues in Gaza. Yes, I want to thank everyone. As always, we can't do this work without your support in so many ways. Everyone just coming and watching, listening, sharing the videos, sharing the articles, being in community together. Each day that passes, we realize that what keeps us all going is each other. And that's what gives us all the strength to continue doing what we do. So thank you for all the support you give us and give each other. And I just want to thank also everyone who has made a donation to support our work. That's how we do it. That's how we are an independent publication. Again, only give us a donation if you can afford it. That way you're making a gift that helps others access this information. It will always be free for everyone. We will never put up a paywall or charge for it. That's our mission, is to inform, educate, and educate people all over the world. So just a few people representing the many who we count on and are so grateful to: Ramona, Gita, Peter, Moy, Bruno, Christina, Ashvin, Nathan, Maura, Danny, Muhammad, Paul, Fran, Iris, Rita, Daniel, Robert, Melissa, and Louis. Thank you all so much for your support.
Thank you all. And on behalf of all of us at the Electronic Intifada, I want to, of course, thank Tamara Nassar for directing and producing this program and all of the work that she does behind the scenes for this show and on the Electronic Intifada's publication website. Also Ellie Gerzon, of course, for social media, Pierre Loisel for making this into a bite-sized radio program every week, and everyone who works at the Electronic Intifada, Michael, Maureen, for fact-checking, and Dave, and everybody, Omar, Leah, and on behalf of myself and everyone at the Electronic Intifada, John, Tamara, Asa, Ali, thank you all, and we'll see you next week.